Well, hello everyone, and welcome once again to the Yorkshire Gamers Reet Big Wargames Podcast. And here we are at episode number 70. Today's guest is called Jared Fishman, and Jared runs his own podcast along with a crew of other people who we'll talk about later on the show called 20-Sided Gamified Podcast. Now, when you're going to get two war gamers who are both podcasters in a room together, they're going to talk for ages. So you've probably seen the length of this episode already, and I think it's going to be around 4 hours. So take it in bite-sized chunks, or wear an adult-sized nappy and do it in one go, whatever you feel like doing. The last episode with Aaron Johnson, really enjoyed that. The campaign is still ongoing. There's been a couple of updates on the YouTube recently with some big battles down in the south of England, would you believe, with the Jacobites, the government forces, and the French. So if you've not listened to that show yet, give it a go and pop down to the Battle of Preston Pans Museum YouTube channel and watch those videos involving Aaron. So the discussion today covers massive long range of topics and various things. It's back on the old format with the four sections, and at the end we talk about Jared's podcast, 20-Sided Gaming, Gamified, sorry. And yeah, sit back, go get yourself a cup of tea and enjoy the show. Without further ado, here's the interview. Well, hello everyone, and we are in the interview section of episode 70 of the Yorkshire Gamer Reet Big Wargames podcast. And my guest today is from our hopefully still friends over the ocean in the good old US of A. And I'm just praying that there isn't a 25% tariff on podcast guests just been introduced in the last 10 minutes.
I hope not.
He spent over 20 years teaching history in schools, using a sprinkling of our hobby within his lessons, and he's also on the board of HMGS Next Gen and North American Simulation and Games Association, and we'll learn all about those during the course of this interview. My guest is also the host of the Wargaming podcast called the 20-Sided Gamified Podcast, which is where we met. And this show is approaching its 100th episode, a bit quicker than I am. And it includes a mix of war games types, including board games, role playing, etc., with a bit of a slant towards the education side of the hobby. And we'll get into that throughout the course of the show. Some might say that the best episode ever was number 66 with yours truly, but it was peaked very shortly afterwards when episode 67 was gate crashed by Pete Berry, which I always thought was one of the funniest moments I've ever had, being interviewed and suddenly Pete Berry turns up out of nowhere, which was great fun. We just cracked on and did it, which was really good. So let's give a right warm Yorkshire welcome to my guest today, Jared Fishman of 20-Sided Gamified. Hello, Jared.
What's going on, Ken? How you doing, dude?
I'm really good, and yourself?
I'm doing well, and I apologize for my country. I don't know what's going on. That's a very serious answer. I've never seen anything like this in my life, so I don't know. Fingers crossed.
It's. I think I can't remember which historian or which famous person said, but he said it's a curse to live in interesting times.
No, definitely, yeah, definitely. It's like it reminds me of like what you teach. Like you teach about these crazy moments in history, and like now we are that crazy moment, you know. So yeah, we're gonna have to see how it goes, dude.
Yeah, well, at least we're still talking, mate.
Oh, definitely. No, for sure. And by the way, man, like we're gonna have to see how my stamina is. I don't know if I could keep up with you. I've listened to your show. It's like I mean your fans are not gonna see this, but like I refilled this coffee. Like I'm ready, dude. I am ready. If this is gonna go, if this ends up going 4 hours, like I'm gonna do my best.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know about your guests, but I know my guests certainly complain if it's too short because they kind of go, right, I'm going to paint for however long this podcast is. So if it's half an hour, they've not even got paints out. They've not even dipped the brush into any colour yet. 4 hours, cracking on, they're getting a few figures done, and
No, but
they
it's pretty
quite like
genius because, like, I've heard that from people that like probably you don't even know, like people that I know that
it.
really
Yeah.
like your show, and that's the biggest thing, like you're going to sit down for 3 hours and paint, and you get a whole episode, so it's kind of like a genius approach, you know.
I'd call it luck, mate. I'd call it luck.
Well, you
Most
know what they say about luck, though, right? Luck is,
yeah,
I butcher quotations, absolutely
yeah.
fucking butcher them, but like, it's like when opportunity meets like, preparation, right? Like it kind of all comes together. So,
Yeah, no, that's absolutely great. And in my introduction, I mentioned that episode with Pete Berry, and that
oh,
was
it's great.
it was just superb, wasn't it? And I was good that you and Kelly just carried on, didn't you?
Oh yeah. Look, I always say this, right? And it probably sounds like I'm kissing your country's ass, but I'm not.
Yeah,
I just think you guys do it right. Like, the UK gamers. It's not that I don't like American gamers, obviously, but there's something very cordial about all of you. I don't know if it's just that the island is small and you have such a tight knit community, but it's very admirable. So in a way, like I feel like that episode was a metaphor for what I like about the UK scene, if that
yeah,
makes sense.
cool. Yeah, no, it was fun. I mean, I've known Pete for a while, and although we literally come from the to the hobby at opposite ends of the scales, quite
Yeah.
literally. We do get on well, and he's a cracking lad, and he really does. He's a fantastic ambassador for 6 mil,
Oh, definitely.
and the stuff that he does. So
And
it's
just a really
absolutely great.
sweet guy. Like he's just
Yeah,
very kind. Like when I met him at Salute last year, just very kind.
yeah, and he's always full of banter as well.
He
Between
is. Well, all of
yeah,
you guys are. You all break balls, but in a very like polite British way or very English way. By the way, I'm going to be on your island in June. The wife and I are finally going to make it to Edinburgh.
oh
So, which I'm
wow,
very excited
fantastic,
about.
fantastic place.
I'm very excited. Yeah, it's going to be great.
If you're right, so if you're going to Edinburgh, you
Yeah.
have got to go to a place called Wonderland Models.
Okay.
It is the best model shop in the world. This is no word of a lie. I have been going there for 50 years.
Oh, wow. Gotcha.
I used to go there with my parents when I was a kid, when we go on a holiday to Edinburgh, and every time I'm in the city, I go to Wonderland Hobbies and come back with a wide array of things that I don't particularly need.
Well, this is really great information because, obviously I'm spinning it into a 20-sided gamified LLC business opportunity.
Of
So,
course, of
so it'll be a
course.
nice little write-off. So I'm gonna probably, well, in all seriousness, I'm probably gonna do an episode live from the city.
Yeah.
Like gonna go around, like get a sense of the gaming scene, and then probably podcast about it. So it should be cool. So I'll definitely take you up on that.
Yeah, well,
So
Wonderland Models,
yeah.
definitely the place to be. Definitely the
By the
place to
way,
be.
I don't know if you've ever had another podcast host on your show. This could be
Mm.
very dangerous because normally I'm the one that asks the question. So I don't even know, like, am I upsetting you with my
No,
am I taking control of your
I,
show?
I would much rather have a chatty person on than
No, for
because
sure.
you'll have had it as well. I'm sure we'll talk about it later on. But sometimes you are literally squeezing blood out of a stone trying to talk to some people, and
Yeah.
when it's more of a conversation, it's so much easier. Um,
Agreed.
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do the 4 minute challenge with you, Jared, which is just a little bit of an icebreaker that we have on the show, and it's just to you to have 4 minutes just to kind of get through as much as you can. Some people fail abysmally. Don't worry. Lots of people have absolutely crucified this. Some people have nailed it. You'll be one way or the other.
Well, we'll find
So,
out.
so I've got a little stopwatch on my phone there, which you can probably just see. So I'll press the button and just give us your best 4 minute elevator pitch on the history of Jared and Wargaming.
Sure. Let me know when you're ready.
Go.
All right. So I was born in 1981, and much like a lot of other people, like the way that I got into, just let's focus on wargaming, right? So the way I got into historical wargaming in particular was really my dad. So my dad had been gaming probably since the 60s, and then into the 70s. So I would say I really started gaming in the late 80s, early 90s, and we lived in a very small apartment. So the kinds of games that we were able to play, we were usually playing on a 5x4 like dining table. And my earliest memories are definitely of my dad painting Napoleonics, like 100%, like 15s, like old Mike's models,
Yeah.
minis, and things like that. But in terms of like my first gaming experiences at home, it was basically like Napoleonics, ACW, a lot of ancients because DBA was really popular in my house, and some colonial wargaming as well. And they were all
Mm.
basically like 15 millimeter figures.
Mm.
So in terms of the gaming that we did at home, that was really what we focused on. But we always would go to the HMGS cons. So we would go to the HMGS East cons. Pretty much Cold Wars was kind of like a staple that we would go to. So it first was in Harrisburg, at least from my day. Like it was first in Harrisburg, then it moved to Lancaster, and we would go to pretty much all those. So I know your focus is like the big games. So a lot of
Mm.
times the big games that we would play were there. Now, I am a weird person in the sense that most people go from sci-fi gaming to historicals. I was the opposite because here's the problem. And this is why I'm so fucking jealous of you guys, right? Sorry for I can curse, right?
Of course,
All
yeah.
right, yeah. This is why I'm so fucking jealous of all you people. It's because you guys have clubs that have 20 or 30 historical wargamers in it. It's so easy
Mm.
for you to connect. The US is just so big. And frankly, like I did not particularly like where I grew up. The town I grew up in, like there everything was blue collar, everybody was a laborer. There were really no wargamers. So
Mm.
what we did was we transitioned to playing things like 40K and Fantasy Battle and Mordheim and games along those lines, right? So from about, I would say, the late 90s to the early 2000s, I was mostly playing sci-fi.
Mm.
Then I took a break from wargaming from about 2001 till about 2005 or 2006. Interestingly enough, the reason I got back into wargaming is twofold. One, it's because of my wife. So my girlfriend at the time, you know how it is, like you fall
Yeah.
madly in love and you don't have friends anymore. And I needed stuff to do. And she was like, well, you used to paint all those miniatures. Why don't you do
Mm.
that? So it's really her fault, right? And I so distinctly remember one of my favorite wargaming periods is World War One. So I had started painting up some World War One stuff. And the other part of this equation is very quickly when I started teaching middle school, I very quickly realized, wow, games can be great here in the
Mm.
classroom. And that's when I started the game club at my school. And really, I would say so if you think about the timing then, I guess it's really the last 19 years or 18 years. That's like when I really developed my own collections of figures. And I've basically been wargaming pretty much ever since, both working with HMGS Next Gen Inc., setting up games for kids, gaming at school. And then, I'll be honest, my closest friend group are more like board gamers. So a lot of times my weekly game is a board game, but miniatures really are the kind of thing that I do when I go away to cons. And I think I fucking nailed that, by the way. So just for all of you so that Ken is holding up his phone. Nailed it. 4 minutes. That's called
Nailed it.
preparation, my
4 minutes.
friends. Yeah.
That was good. That was good. I'm impressed with that. That
But
was good.
also it's very truthful. Like, I mean, that really is my arc. So
So was it your dad then that got you into history as well as gaming? Was
yeah, I
he big
definitely
into
think
that
so.
side of things? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, if I'm just being honest, like, I wouldn't argue that my dad, it's not like my dad was going and reading books about, like, the economics of the United States or this or that, but he was
Mm.
very into history because of wargaming. So, and I think for me, see, again, like, I'm a little bit of like, I think I'm weird. Like, gaming is so in my blood and history is so in my blood that it's like it's almost even hard to answer those kinds of questions like, well, how did you get into it? It's almost like, well, how did you start wearing shoes, um so I just have very distinct memories of all those painted miniatures. And I think for me, I think what probably to some extent differentiates me from my dad is
Mm.
that, and with all due respect, I think for me, I would look at wargaming and then history. So I would go to the library and get books on, conflict and things like that. But I would always ask more questions. I'd be like, "Oh, well, who was the president or who was the leader? What was going on economically? Well, what did people believe in that place, religion wise?" So I think that in a way, wargaming was kind of like a pathway to like really liking history. And then studying conflict was a way of getting connected to the broader picture, like the broader scheme of history in general, which is
Mm.
really like what led me to studying history in school and then eventually becoming a teacher.
Yeah, did you have an enthusiastic, inspiring history teacher at school? I mean, I know I did, and I've told the story many times of how he used to take. There was a desk at the front of the class that where the lid would come off, and he would take that up and he would put it on his arm, and then he'd march up and down the rows of desks with a massive pointer, pretending to be a Roman
Oh
legionary.
God.
uh, that sort of an inspiration of a person can often turn on or off kids to various subjects.
Yeah, it's not going to be a popular answer.
Mm.
I fucking hated school. I did. Like I really did. Don't get me wrong, right?
Mm.
I had history teachers that I liked,
Yeah,
but I don't think I ever had that super nerd, like that history teacher that embodied the
yeah.
subject. And again, I with all due respect, like I can even name drop teachers I had that were great teachers, you know? Like the person who comes to mind for me is like Joe Lanza, who was a US history teacher. And I always enjoyed the ancient and medieval world and European history, like that type of history a little bit more than I liked
Mm.
American. But I think I'll say this, right? I don't think I ever had a high school teacher that like really made me want to read more, mostly because
Right.
I was a rebel. But I will
Yeah.
say this, like somebody like Joe Lanza, he believed in me. And that matters a lot more to me than anything
Oh,
else, right?
definitely. Yeah.
Because again, I don't even necessarily blame the teachers I worked with. I really don't. Like for a variety of reasons, I just did not have a good experience in school. And I can go into it if you want. Like I know you like the long form, so I mean I'm
Yeah.
happy to talk about it. But like Joe Lanza pulling me aside and enjoying me, right, as like a student, even though like even when I did well, I was kind of an asshole about it. Be like, "Oh, guess what, Joe? Like, I did not do a single piece of reading and I just got like a 95 on your test." That's not a
Mm.
good thing, you know?
No.
But
Yeah.
he did say to me, actually, myself and one of my other good friends who's a podcaster, but he's like more of a political podcaster, a friend of mine named Mike Leon. He kind of pulled us aside and he said, "Look, you guys may not realize it, but eventually you're both going to be leaders." And that did resonate with me because most of my teachers would never say that. So that was fuel to get better and to learn
Mm.
more, you know?
Yeah.
I would also say too, Ken, that it's hard to remember if I'm really just being honest. Like, it's so long ago and I don't know what your school systems are like. I went to a pretty decent school, but like I never thought about school. Like I thought about, am I going to get into a fight today? Am I going to get into it with somebody? Am I going to get into it with a teacher? Like those are the things that I thought about. I didn't think about, oh, what am I going to learn today? And to make matters even worse, when I was in a history class and I did no work, like literally
Mm.
nothing. As a high school student, just to be clear though, not college. That's a very different ball game, but even when I did raise my hand and participate and I knew things that weren't in the book, people would look at me like a weirdo. So it's like lose lose.
Yeah.
Either I'd sit there and shut up and look like the slacker, or let me get up and like talk to you about this. Like, actually, I will never forget. Like, if you want to talk about burned memories, singed memories into the brain, I will never forget. Like, we were learning about the Indian Mutiny or the Sepoy Mutiny, right? And I will never forget, like, my teacher asking us this question. And by the way, another great guy, Adam Burak, like, really great, like, ninth grade history teacher. And he kind of asked, like, do you guys know what really upset the sepoys, like the people who were fighting in, with the British in a lot of cases? And I'm like, and I raised my hand. I'm like, well, they would grease the cartridges in pork fat.
Yeah.
And everybody looked at me like I was an alien. Like, oh, and I can remember like this really, really good looking girl that would sit next to me. And And like she was one of those people who was very affluent, who had like 80,000 tutors, and her resenting me for knowing that,
No.
you know? And I just remember the irony of that, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's kind of my school experience.
Yeah, it's interesting though because so many people, obviously you'll be the same talking to so many people about history. Have some people have that spark, that moment. My last guest, he was in Derby and he saw a, a, a march through his town celebrating the 250th anniversary of the Jacobite Rising, and then he goes to university, and then he's spending his whole life looking at Jacobite history. And I remember my history teacher, and I remember we used to have a magazine called Look and Learn, which used to be like a children's magazine, but it would always have a historical slant, and it'd have these big pictures in of, Roman forums, and it would have, very basic but informative instructions on it about what was going on. And I just lapped all that up, and here we are a
Yeah,
long
no,
time
totally.
later.
No, totally. But like memory can be really powerful, right? Like on
Mm,
one hand, like there are a lot of things I don't remember about school, but there are definitely those moments. I mean, I could remember, like, if you really want to kind of get into the nitty gritty, right?
mm,
I absolutely remember being at a wargaming convention, like pretty young, as like a really young kid. I must have been in fourth or fifth grade. And I remember seeing a trench board, like a 15
ooh,
millimeter trench
yeah,
board for the First
yeah.
World War, right? And I can also very distinctly remember, and I don't know if you've ever seen this before, but like the people who would make those periscopes with
Oh
mirrors.
yes,
Yeah,
yes, yeah.
so I looked through one and I can remember like that burning question, even being like a little kid. Why in the world would people dig holes in the ground and fight battles like this? And honestly, like so if you're really trying to cut to the core of like a moment, it's obviously my dad bringing me there, right? And obviously my dad sparking my interest in that. But seeing that table, I'm not surprised that like, my master's thesis was about World War One, and if I was going to get a doctorate in history, it was going to be about World War One. So I mean, I would say like for me, like more than a book or more than a person, seeing that table is really what kind of sparked my interest.
Clearly, it's taken hold somewhere because you've gone from that kid with the fuck you attitude in class to the one stood at the front doing the teaching.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing, right? I mean, and again, like, I know I feel like I keep saying the same line, but, I don't mean to sound nasty about this or anything or judgmental, but, like, for me, going away to college was huge for me, right? Like, so I spent a couple of years after high school at home. Once I kind of got out on my own, and my department head that I work with now, she's like the most lovely person, so smart. She kind of still says to me, Jared, you're a rebel. You really do need to do things your way. And I think that
Yeah.
there's a lot of truth to that. Once I kind
Mm,
of got on my own and started to feel a little bit more confident, like away from my little crappy town and being around more people who were like academic, where it was actually cool
mm,
to know things,
mm,
man, that's really when things really turned around for me. I kind of got to start over. And I always loved to read and always loved to learn. And then all of a sudden you start getting those good grades back. And it's like, uh-oh, like that's really when kind of for me, like I transformed into a really, really good student. And then once I got to grad school, I mean, that's really when I feel like I realized I am actually very good at this. Like I'm good at taking things that are really complicated and boiling them down so that literally anybody could understand it. And I think
mm.
that that really is, again, like that pathway that led me to be the person who was sort of leading those conversations, and actually it's less about me and more about learning how to draw things out of people, right? Learning how to ask that question where you're not the one talking and it's like the kid is, the student is. And I think that that's something I've learned how to do pretty well.
Yeah, excellent. So I think if we could, if you don't mind, if you just we could just talk about your day job really, because we're going to talk about a lot about wargaming later on, but you've kind of mixed the two together in your teaching career.
I have.
Yeah, so where do you work now, and what has brought you to bring wargaming into the classroom?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, I can give you a kind of like a big 360 view. So
Mm.
the big thing for me, right? So this is like 2005 to 2007 is when I got my master's in history.
Mm.
So I got a master's in history, right? And that's when I kind of had to decide, do I want to get the doctorate or do I want to pursue like secondary education? Now, everybody who gets a master's in history, I would say everybody, the big thing is like, I should get the doctorate, right? But for me, I didn't have the language skills, if I'm really just being blunt. Like, what I mean by that is my area of specialization was Austro-Hungarian foreign policy during World War One.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that subject really well, but like to really be a historian, you've got to read the original sources. And I
Yeah.
would have had to learn like 4 or 5 different languages. And I didn't come from that stock, no matter how hard I worked. Like, so somebody gave me the advice to look into independent schools because in an independent school in the United States, these are basically private schools.
Yeah.
And contrary to what some people think, it's not just the 1% that goes to these schools. Like there are all kinds of scholarships. There's all kinds of financial aid programs. So yes, you do get like the elite of the elite, but you also get a really healthy mix of plenty of other people that bring something interesting to the table. So my first, besides teaching college at Iona, college courses, really like my first real foray into having my own classroom was at a school called Hackley, and that's in Tarrytown, New York, about 30 miles outside of New York City. I worked there for about 15 years teaching middle school and high school, and that's where I developed some courses on gaming, like specifically about gaming. And then 3 years ago, my wife and I decided that we were going to buy a house in Connecticut, and I ended up moving to her school. So the current school I work at is a school called Brunswick, and it's in Greenwich, Connecticut. So we kind of have like an interesting living situation. So we live part of the time in Greenwich, in a basically like a faculty subsidized like apartment, like a work apartment. She teaches art and ceramics. I teach history. I also run our school's Model UN team, which is a really big thing. I don't know if it's big in the UK, but it's really big here. And I've been at this school for, this is my 3rd year, and it's been going great. I love my job. Like you'll rarely hear me make a complaint, about what I do. I mean, it is exhausting. My co-host Kelly makes fun of me all the time for this, but on one hand, I basically work 8 months out of the year, right? So I get 12 months of pay really over the course of 8 months. But that 8 months is draining, like you're constantly doing stuff in a very different way than like an office job, like where you really are bringing your work home and everything. Now, your other question was about the wargaming piece, right? All right. So I realized a couple of things very quickly when I first started teaching. Number one, I don't have, despite what some people may think, I don't have the kind of ego where I think that everything I say is so vitally important that I'm going to stand in the front of the room and talk at children for an hour.
Yeah.
No one wants that, right? So I realized that, and I also realized, and to be, I really don't remember doing this in school. Like I remember playing in economics class. I remember playing like a stock market game.
All right. Yeah.
I definitely remember that. But a lot of wargamers that I knew when I was getting ready to start teaching, a lot of them were like, man, you could do so many cool things, like, run a war game in class. And I just started to integrate that into like my lessons. So what I really mean by that is it's not that every single day we're playing a war game, but a couple of times in the year, whether it's a war game or whether it's some other type of simulation or tabletop game connected to something that we're doing in school, I try to integrate those. And honestly, for a whole slew of different reasons, the kids absolutely love it. And honestly, like now that I'm old, when I will get kids in their 20s that come back to me that are kicking ass as lawyers or doctors or finance people, and what they remember, besides all the crazy things that I say in a given day, they all remember the games. They really do. So it when you have something physical that you're doing in the classroom, you're not just sitting there writing. You're gonna write eventually, but like when you're pushing minis around the table or you're playing a game about the Black Death where you're a leader trying to figure out how to save your town and you've got to roll dice and everything, it makes people want to learn more. And I am one of those people in the US that, like, you know, not to toot my own horn, but like I am in a small select group of people where it's like I know that this is true based on the research and experience and everything like that, So ultimately, if I can end this part, it's I want school to be fun. I think that learning is fun and I want my kids to have fun. I don't
Mm.
want them to be bored every day. And games are a really, really great way to get kids motivated to learn.
Oh, without a shadow of a doubt. And I think I've spoken to a couple of people on the show in the past who, aside from wargaming, they do a lot of, the quite high business people. And the stuff that you can learn from wargaming when you think of a wider picture, you're talking about communication skills, you're talking about decision making, you're talking about hierarchies of, somebody's in charge, you're going to listen to what they're going to do, you're going to negotiate with them. You're looking at resource management. There are just so many parts to it that quite often what the problem is that some people will see the war side of it, and that's what's happened in the UK for many years, is that people would try and get a war games club at school, and the teacher would go, no, it's war. But and I'm sure you've seen that the kids develop all these myriad of skills from a game that they can get engaged in.
Yeah, and so here's I again, like I tend to be very objective just because of what
Mm,
I do for a living, right? I've somewhat trained myself to not have really strong opinions because very often answers really are a mix of different viewpoints, right? So here's the thing. On one hand, I do totally understand. I really do, like, for people that are worried about, wargaming looking like warmongering and like, is this really necessarily something that we want our kids to be doing? I do understand that opinion, but I would argue the following, right? In my experience, and again, like, because I find myself to be somewhat of a controversial person, right? I'm probably going to really piss off all the wargamers right now. And I'll even pose it to you too, right?
mm,
I mean, in all seriousness, when you're pushing miniatures around a table, how often are any of us really thinking about killing or really thinking about bloodshed or really thinking, man, this is awesome. I love death. Nobody is thinking about that. I would actually argue that you could just leave the tabletop as is, take the miniatures off the table, put blocks in their place, put little friendly dinosaurs or little Legos or something, and unless you're there for the aesthetics, meaning the beauty of a wargaming
mm,
table, people are going to have the same experience. Kids are not thinking about the bloodshed. And honestly, parents aren't either. Meaning, what the reason that parents like games, whether you're talking about a war game or whether you're talking about maybe something a little less controversial, like, maybe you're talking about Settlers of Catan or something, is because of everything that you said, right, Ken? All those points you just made. Parents like games because of what they do to kids' brains, right?
mm.
If you think about the average day of a kid, I can't speak for the UK because I don't know a massive amount about your schools, even though I will be honest. I do somewhat have a little bit of a dream with the wife where maybe when I'm a little older, maybe retire to the UK and find a school to teach at so I can do some more wargaming because you guys have a far better scene than we do. But again, like all those skills, that kids kind of develop as they're playing. Think about what their day is like. They get talked
Mm.
to all day long. They're not making decisions. They just sit there like an empty vessel, right? And again, don't get me wrong, there are definitely teachers who don't teach that way anymore, but there are a lot that do, where they just sit there and blather on. Games are the opposite. Like, I often joke with my kids, I'm like, you're probably going to do more thinking in the next 30 minutes playing this game than you will do your whole day. So I would argue that maybe the issue is that And I'm going to talk about this later because I have your show notes about things that piss me off about gaming, right?
Yeah.
But like, maybe it's just we haven't had the right ambassadors. Maybe we're
Yeah.
saying the wrong things because look, I'll get into it a little early, There are so many of those people where it's like, oh, all people need to war game because like our freedom is based on that. It's like, please just stop. I'm sorry, but just stop. That's not why people war game. Like,
Yeah.
and actually, I would argue it's actually pathetic, right? If I wear a wargaming shirt and walk around like those assholes in the United States that have like that photo of the Constitution and it's like, I don't run, like these colors don't run, we
Yeah.
would be the first people running from battle. So it's
Mm.
like, I am not going to thump my chest and call myself nationalistic because I like to play bolt action. In other words, maybe we sometimes are not sending the right message about why wargaming is actually great.
No, that's a good point. That's a good point. And it's for the likes of me and you, the communicators, to try and get that across. And I always do. I will always say that this hobby has brought me the best friends, and the best memories, and the biggest, massivest collection of toy soldiers you can ever imagine.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you're right. Like that's what's great about it. And
Yeah.
again, like connecting to your point, I mean, there are people that I would never see in public and be like, "Oh, I'm going to go talk to that person." It's really gaming that has brought so
Mm.
many different people together. Like think about this, right? And I don't know what your own wargaming club is like, but where else do you see little kids, teenagers, lawyers, a dock worker, and then people who are retired, all in the same place, all having the same conversation? Gaming is very unique in that sense. So yeah, that camaraderie that comes from gaming, I see it all the time. You'll have the jock quarterback, most popular kid in the school,
Yeah.
rolling dice next to a total introvert, right? Who might be a computer programmer, and they get along better than they ever would anywhere else in society. So,
Yeah.
yeah, again, I think sometimes we have the wrong conversation about this hobby.
Yeah, and you can see that sometimes with people who are, naturally introverted, who maybe don't speak to that many people, but then the first couple of lines of a conversation might be quite staid, quite difficult to get on. But as soon as you get onto gaming, their eyes just go boom, and
Absolutely.
chat, 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 chat. Oh, you remember this? Oh, yeah, and it's a great leveler,
Yeah.
great way to talk to people.
And connecting back to one of your earlier points, right? Think
Mm.
about the workplace, right? Think about somebody who might be a little introverted, who might be hard for them to integrate with the people that they're working with. Maybe they're a little shy. Well, guess what? And lots of companies are doing this now. Put a war game out there. Get everybody
Mm.
in there like as an icebreaker. And trust me, people will know each other within 5 minutes of playing that game because I say this all the time, right?
Yeah.
You put dice in someone's hand and they change.
Mm.
Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the
Just
worse.
for the
Like I
worst.
feel like I learn so much about people once I see them rolling dice.
No, very true indeed. So, well, let's just move on a little bit and talk about your wargaming yourself. Obviously, you're using it in your classroom, but do you get time to, and you're doing it with the podcast as well, do you get time to use wargaming as a social aspect? Do you get time to do it actually yourself without anything else going on?
Are you sure you want this answer?
Yeah,
That's the
go
real question, Ken.
on.
Do
Yeah,
you want
yeah,
it?
go on.
All right.
Oh, of
Well,
course.
okay. Well, in all seriousness, kidding aside, of
Mm.
course I do. Of course I get
Yeah.
to play games for fun, but I like to describe myself, and it's just who I am. Like I can't help it. Like
Mm.
what I'm about to describe, but it's almost like, without sounding arrogant, you talk to a filmmaker, right? And they sit down to watch a movie with you. And to me, it's like I don't know anything about that.
Yeah.
I like to analyze a film, but it's like I'm just, enjoying it. And that person is just sitting there and they're like, well, the camera was in the wrong place. I don't know
Yeah.
why they put that light there. I
Yeah.
hate to say it, but because of my background, I would argue
Mm.
that it's very, very hard for me to just sit down and casually enjoy a game. I don't know if that's depressing, but it's hard. It really is hard for me because I run so many games that a lot of times, like I bought my house in part to have a wargaming room, right? And I have a great wargaming space, And again, I don't want to misrepresent here. I have people over here over the summertime when I'm free, and we have a blast. But what I'm trying to say is when I sit down and if we're playing a new game or somebody's rolling out a new game and I'm playing, it's very hard for me just to be a casual. Like I'm thinking about game mechanics. I'm thinking about how they're running the game. I'm thinking about what people are thinking at the table. So it's a little bit hard for me. But I'm that way with everything. Like it's just it's just the way my brain works. I don't know if I'm an obsessive. I don't know what it is, but like for example, if I pick up my guitar, I'm not just gonna practice. Like I'm gonna write a song, and I want to put the song out, and I want people to listen to it, and I want it to be really great. I don't do anything casually. I will say this though, when it comes to gaming, board gaming has kind of been an interesting thing for me because I grew up not liking board games, mostly because why would you play a board game when you could put, 1,000 miniatures on the table, right? But board games, that actually is it's more casual to me. I can sit down and to some extent turn it off a little bit, probably because I don't have as much experience with that compared with like role play gaming or miniatures, But if we're focusing more on that casual bit, of course, like I have people over, we'll play all sorts of different things. And I know we'll probably get into it a little later, but like if you saw my basement, I mean, I've got tons of historical wargaming periods, everything from World War I to World War II to ancients, so trust me, I can sit down and have a good time, but there is a punishment when you blend your hobby with your job. And I do suffer from that,
Yeah, because I've spoken to different people over the years. Some war games manufacturers, for example, who will close the door to the workshop at 5 o'clock in the evening, and they will go home, and the last thing they will ever think about is wargaming and war games figures. Whereas these other people who live it, breathe it, do it all the time, and never get bored with it, and think of it more of you know a pleasure that they can work and play in the same hobby rather than having work and home space. So you're kind of full on.
Yeah, very much so. And
Mm,
I don't know, like I definitely, even though maybe this is the right way to phrase it, even though I kind of have professionalized my hobby, I still really like it. Again, like I don't know if it's weird, but like I'll give you a great example. Ready? So
yep.
when I run games for kids, probably the biggest stumbling block is movement,
Mm,
meaning kids, it's a struggle for them to measure distances and figure out wheeling angles and things along those lines, right? What's fun for me about the hobby, beyond all the painting and everything, because again, like I'm probably coming off, hopefully I'm coming off well to your audience, but
yeah.
like, because of course, like I love all that stuff, like I'm literally sitting on my floor over here. I've got some 15 mil Brits that I need to paint up in KGL for a Napoleonic project. But like, what I really like, what I like the challenge. I like saying to myself, well, how can I figure out a different way to move? So sitting down for 2 hours with a cup of coffee and like looking at a bunch of games and saying to myself, okay, well, what if I go with a gridded approach here?
Mm,
That's fun for me. That's one of the most fun elements of the hobby for me is like sitting down and doing game design and thinking about how to make things work. And really what it comes down to is like thinking about my players' experience. I want people to have fun. So it's like if I can cut away some of the fat or cut away some of the things that might be a challenge for a gamer, that to me is really, really, really rewarding and enjoyable. And then you kind of get to go and run the game and it's like, oh shit, that worked, and everybody's having a blast.
yeah.
So yeah, that's those kinds of things are really fun for me. So whether it's casual or professional, yeah, I'm in it all the time. But it's such a part of me. Like it's part of my DNA. So I never see it as a burden. If that if that makes sense.
No, it doesn't. I'm very similar to yourself in that, outside of work, I'm very much totally engaged in doing something, whether I'm painting or I very rarely game, but doing the podcast or planning a project or whatever. And I think that's a wonderful place to be in, rather than you wanting to switch it off, because I don't want to switch it off, I enjoy it more. So that's lovely to hear. And we've just added art, art and maths to our list of things that wargaming develops for kids. So I think we're
Oh,
doing very well
absolutely. And you
there.
know what too? Like again, like on that note, that's one of the best things about gaming, right? And let's even if we just, cuz I know your audience is really like miniatures heavy. So let's just focus on that. The best thing about miniature wargaming is you can do it how you want, I know people who paint and paint and paint and never play.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
on some level, like they drive me crazy because it's like put the goddamn tables on figures on the table. But to each their own, so whether you like the game design part or you like the manufacturing part or you only like playing and don't paint, I think it's a really great hobby when you can make it your own and you can kind of do things the way that you want to do it. I think that's really special, and you can't say that about every hobby out there.
Oh, very true indeed. But if I had to kind of get you in a corner and say, right, Jared, any scale, any period, what are we going to play?
Oh,
Yeah.
dude, that's a brutal question, Ken. That's a brutal question. I mean, if I could only get you to come over to the States at some point or other, you could see my place. I have a lot of
Yeah.
stuff. But I jest. Like I can narrow it down. Okay, why don't we start here, right? I would say if we're really like gun to my head, like favorite I don't know if I'm jumping the gun here, but like favorite rules, favorite period. I love colonial wargaming for a whole slew of reasons, right? Now, and I guess like for your audience probably knows what that means, but just in case like somebody is listening that doesn't know what the hell that is. I do like late 19th century, early 20th century wargaming in Africa, in Asia, in other parts of the world in which you have Western industrialized forces fighting against almost like polyglot indigenous forces for a whole
Yeah.
bunch of different reasons. What I really like about that period, and my preferred scale for that is 25s, because that's where you can really have fun with the painting. And what I mean by that is, they photograph really well. It's easy for people to see them. They're so nice and physical and tangible, like you're really picking up lead. In terms of what's really dynamic about those games is everybody's got different weapons, which means the armies all play differently,
Yeah.
all have
Yeah. Very
different
true.
strategies. And also, there is something to be said about like if you want to get into the history part,
Mm.
the ramifications of these conflicts are really still felt, to this day,
Today, yeah.
You know, I admire the fact that you had people picking up shields and spears trying to keep, foreign oppressors out of their country. I admire that. Yet at the same time, right, on the flip side, if Joe the dock worker ends up in the British Army, there is also something to be said about, you know, you and 100 people on a battlefield, trying to survive an
Yeah.
onslaught of 2,000 Zulus, right? And I think that those folks also admire one another. Like the kinds of things, for example, that happen in Zululand today, where you've got these connections specifically around Isan Lawana and Rorke's Drift between, the Zulu people and British veterans, I think is a really kind of special thing, trying to remember, this
Yeah.
horrible thing that happened and move forward. But if we're only focusing on the gaming, it's such a dynamic period, right? Because of the way that the armies are set up. My favorite set of rules, pretty much of all time, is A Sword in the Flame. I absolutely love that game, and I think that you were asking about the podcast before. Game
Mm.
design and thinking is a really big part of the show. And man, The Sword in the Flame. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to play it, but it's
I've
so
never played it. I had a copy.
Come on, Ken.
I had a copy and I actually sold it because I've never got the colonial bug, I'm afraid. But they're just they when I read them, I actually thought they were for a later period. I was looking for a set for World War One in Middle East, Mesopotamia, Palestine, which people know I'm quite big into. So I bought them and just put them to one side and never used them because they weren't what I was looking for. But when I did read, I did have a flick through them and I thought, oh, these are quite interesting, these, but never actually played them.
No, totally. I think it's really, even though it came out, in 1979, I
Mm,
I kind of look at that game as really like not just one of the first modern war games in a lot of ways, but it's so innovative. Like the way that it uses cards for variable movement, the way that it uses dice for movement, where you don't always know how far you're going to go. The fact that it introduced D20s as a shooting system. I really, really, really like that game. That's really like one of my favorite periods and favorite skills. And it's really, see, it's more of a skirmish game. I feel like,
mm,
and I think this is because of like my introduction to wargaming. I personally look at 25s as really being ideal for skirmish wargaming
mm.
unless you have space. If you have space, then it's a different story because then you could really do like the 25 mil thing as like big battles and with big units and things like that, which I know you are like a master of. Now on the flip side though,
Mm,
I do really like grand tactical games as well. So and in terms of like my preferred scales for that, 6 mil is one of those things with which by the way, I don't want to upset Bacchus because I have a ton of their stuff.
yeah.
But like, I don't know, it's a little you can paint them really well. They're a little hard to see. So for
Mm,
me, I like playing games like Bloody Big Battles, like a really like a grand tactical bird's eye view type war game, and I really like the scale for that being between 10 mil and 15 mil.
mhm.
I like games that I don't know how interested anymore I'm in making a million rolls to see if you form square, to see what angle the square is. Like testing to charge, testing to see like every little thing. I like grand tactical games where it's like I don't have to worry so much about the formation. What I have to worry about is I'm a general and I have to make my decisions on the battlefield.
Yeah.
So I think those are really the two big areas that I really like. So it's like, that 25s with skirmishy type games and then more those grand tactical type games using a smaller scale.
It's an interesting how the hobbies kind of diverged into those different areas because I have always done the bigger games with the bigger areas, and a lot of the things that are brought into bloody big battles and all that sort of thing with the higher level command is what actually you get from the person next to you when you stood at a 30 odd foot table. You have all those interactions of brigade and divisional commanders actually between the people.
I agree completely.
Yeah, it's just different ways of looking at it. And I've always been that person who likes the look of the table. So if you tell me, "Oh, I've got this great game, Ken, we could do Waterloo in 3 hours," I'm thinking it's taken me 40 years to paint this lot. I'm not putting them on a table and clearing them up in three
No,
hours.
and there's truth to that, right? Like
Yeah,
again, the beauty of gaming is you can kind of do it how you want.
yeah,
And look, if you're asking me to defend or argue for the big game, right? I could really summarize this very quickly. There's nothing like a big game. Like
mm,
you can't it's almost indescribable. And you're absolutely right. When you've got 20 players on each team, you do get that. And again, like I can speak about this from experience. Now I don't remember which war games illustrated it was. It must have been in 2016 or 2017. But if your audience looks up an article that I wrote called Schooling Borodino
okay.
at Hackley, it's kind of long winded. I don't want to be long winded, but there's this thing called X Day. And X Day was something that had happened at Hackley, I think 2 or 3 years in a row, where teachers could basically take a day, all classes are canceled. And basically, what you would do is you would set up a really unique activity for kids
Oh wow.
and kind of do whatever you want. And people would basically, sign up to do it.
Mm.
So I'm misspeaking slightly because I don't think I did Borodino for one of those, but it's all in the
Mm.
same
Yeah.
wheelhouse. I ran Borodino in 15 millimeter scale on a 20 by 6 foot table. There were
Nice.
30 players, 15 aside, and God, I couldn't even tell you how many miniatures. I mean, it was thousands upon
Yeah.
thousands of miniatures, and you nailed it on its head because the kid who played Napoleon and the kid who played, I guess it was Kutuzov, they were totally overwhelmed. They had their own troops, but
Yeah.
had literally no time to move them because they were putting out fires, trying to get people on the same page. There is nothing like the big war game. And I really hope, and I'm not just saying this, by the way, Ken, because I know I'm not trying to kiss your ass here. Like,
Yeah.
I think there is something very special about that kind of experience. And don't
Mm.
get me wrong, not everybody can do it. There's a lot that goes into, like, you've got to be a really committed, crazy war
Oh
gamer
God.
to
Oh
have that,
God.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's something so special about it. And I grew up playing a lot of those kinds of games, which is why at least once a year I try to run one. So
Mm.
I've done Ishan Lawana before. I did Borodino. We were gonna do something in the Pacific during World War II, but that was the COVID year. Um, you know, so and then I left the school, so it's like, I don't think they do it anymore, but there's, like I said, there's just something really special about it.
Yeah. It's for me, I'm all about the big game. I don't deride any other types of games. It's just I don't shout about them because that's not where my enthusiasm lies. I think I mentioned on your show that I don't interview people that I don't necessarily connect with about I'm not going to have somebody on that's going to tell me about their new 10-figure skirmish game not because I don't like it or don't want it or don't think it should be around. It's just that I don't connect with it. So that enthusiasm that I'm going to have when I talk to my guest just isn't going to be there. So, and that's a big part of my show. And we'll talk about guests and stuff
Yeah, no, totally,
later
totally.
on. But yeah. So that's it. That's it. That's interesting. That colonial, not something that's ever ticked my box, but you never know. You never know.
Yeah,
I've still
no.
got, I've still got a few revolutions of the sun before I pop off.
Well, and don't get me wrong, like, I understand, like, it is kind of a weird period, right? Like,
Yeah.
because again, like, it's very disparate, and I guess, like, if I'm being critical, right, and I'm sort of I have friends that would make the same arguments. I'm somewhat plagiarizing a few people I know, but well, look, I don't mean to get into your brain, right? But I don't know. Like, I know you're a really big painter, and
Mm.
it's like, if we're just really forgetting about who we're painting, I would argue there are periods that are way more colorful. If you like to paint, it might get really boring painting Zulus, or it might really get boring painting, a bunch of khaki, colored, British uniforms from the Boer War. So it's like, if I think about what you really like, at least what I know about you. So I know you're right big into the Italian wars, and
Mm.
I've seen a lot of Napoleonics on your pages. These are really beautiful armies, and even for me, right? One of the armies that I just absolutely love to paint was like an 1813 or 1812 French army from the Napoleonic age, where it's like, oh God, like all the flags, all the different, satellite troops that were in the French army at the time. I mean, it's so fun, so I
Mm.
get it. Like, I get why, somebody might not want to play World War II. And I hope I'm not putting words in your mouth, but
No, no,
they're not
it's
really that dynamic to paint.
there are some periods, and not particularly for me, but there are legacy issues with empire for the UK, which
Yeah.
are more prevalent now than they were when I was a lad. It was more of a history was more of a flashman type, let's go and take over the world kind of thing. And didn't we do brilliantly for having all the world pink?
Yeah.
Whereas now it's a completely different way around. But I don't think, unless it's subconsciously, that's affected my decision making when it comes to colonial wargaming. It's just never ticked that box, and I don't particularly know why. But then I have a huge gap between the end of the Crusades and the Italian Wars, which is quite literally my dark ages because I don't game it at all. So
Yeah.
it's you can't do everything all the time, can you?
Yeah, but I'll push back a little bit on that, just in that, and I've had this conversation many times with people. I mean,
Mm.
look, no war is pretty. We all,
No,
like,
no.
every country has stains on it. Like, there's nothing that bothers me more, like, talking about education. And we went through this, for quite some time. Don't get me wrong. Europeans have done a lot of really bad things, right? Like, I mean, and that I'm not saying you did, Ken, or you know what I mean? Like, these are things that happened a very long time ago. And yes, you absolutely can make the argument that British imperialism did not do good things for the world. But at the same time, like, do you know anything about the Chinese dynasties? How brutal they
Mm.
were, or
Yeah,
how
I know.
brutal the
Yeah.
Zulu were, or how brutal certain tribes in the Amazon were? We It's always like, to me, like, if we're talking about history, it's always about power. Bottom line is, no matter what set of figures you're painting, there's always
Mm.
going to be negative
Yeah, there's a
with it.
story behind
Even,
it. Yeah.
yeah, even your Italian wars, look at how goddamn corrupt that time period was. I mean, even for the people that go rah 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 nationalism, I'm going to paint these minis because, like, I'm pro my government or pro my country. Shit, like, in the Italian wars, it was barely Italians that were doing the fighting. It's condottieri that are going and hiring out mercenaries. Like, what's
Mm.
more immoral than that? So it's like, I don't know. I Look, you should feel like you can game whatever you want, you know?
Yeah, as I say, I think if there is a block, it's subconscious rather than conscious.
Yeah.
But yeah, it can lead to difficult conversations with people who aren't in wargaming. I think
Yeah.
is the side of it that I would kind of say. I think if we turned up and we had a game and we were playing with German SS in World War II in a battle around Caen, where first and 12th SS divisions were fighting, none of us would have an issue with it at all. If we were playing medieval Wars of the Roses or something like that, and somebody turned up with a load of figures with Nazi flags, then maybe we might go,
No, I get
hmm.
that, dude. Look, here's the thing. I hear, like, so I could tell you, like, from my perspective, right? Because here I am, like, arguing for play with whatever you want. But look, if I'm just being, super straightforward here, like, if I got hired for a consulting job to come in and gamify, something, or bring a war game in as like an icebreaker, I'm not bringing my American Civil War collection. And frankly, like,
Yeah.
even as a white dude, middle-aged white guy from the north, even like putting them in my own gaming table at home, I think you have
Mm.
to be some kind of asshole to not feel a little bit weird about that. So for example, and again, like, I'm just really just, you could probably tell, like, I just sort of say what's on my mind.
Yeah, no
Look,
worries with that.
if people of color come to my house, if a black person comes to my house, I'm going to
Mm.
be a little embarrassed and feel really odd if I have them sit at a table, even if I say, hey, like, you pick your side, and then they go and get to look at a bunch of Confederate flags. There's something inherently wrong about that, you know? So, as much as you guys over in the UK might feel a little weird about those pith helmets, or some of your checkered past from the medieval world, we have that too. And I think there's reality to that. I'm not
Yeah.
saying that people can do whatever they want, but there's a difference between doing what you want in your own home and, like, if I'm gonna represent the hobby, I'm sorry, but, like, I'm not playing Gettysburg unless there is a conversation that happens before that. Because again, like, it's again, like, it's the same people who would basically argue about, like, statues or memorials being put up and saying, "Well, that's part of our history, we can't ignore it." And that's true, but that is not the same thing as putting up a monument glorifying something that happened from the past. In the same way that I, as a business owner, there's a really big difference between, me taking those minis, and painting them up in my home, and literally going and putting them on parade in public, for people to game with. I don't necessarily see all of those things as equal.
Yeah, it's a complicated situation, and the answers aren't always the same when the answer that you might give to somebody might be different depending on their perception of the
Well, yeah.
the history period or whatever.
Right. And again,
Um,
look, I mean, even if you're playing ancients, right? See, the difference with that is the Confederate flag means something to people in the United States. And you might have ancestors that are still alive that have seen that flag or have been a
mm,
part of those moments. It's different, for example, than playing, Romans versus Gauls until you start thinking to yourself, who was more savage than the Romans? Like they did horrifying things. Like they
yeah,
put even some of the modern dictators of the world, they kind of put to shame. But I guess for some people, and I've had this conversation with so many different folks, right? For some people, the difference is time. That
yes,
happened so long ago that it's just not the same thing to say, well, those Roman miniatures represent people who crucified people along the Appian Way. That's different than, for example, I can still go to the American South and see the Confederate flag, and then you're putting miniatures on the table representing that. People would argue that those things are different, and I can see that.
yeah. I think the most important thing about anything like that is the ability to have an educated and engaging conversation about it without shooting each other or having a riot or
Well,
whatever. I think
dude,
that's the most important thing in the world.
and look, you're describing my day-to-day life, right? I mean, we live in a really wild time, right? So, for example, even in my own classroom, a lot of times, here I'll use like a really really really
Mm,
clear example, right, from the recent past, like looking at something like January 6th, right? There are some people who firmly believe that that was an insurrection, that it was an attempted coup, that it's really like one of the great stains on American
mm,
history. And then you could have some people in the room who will argue that those people were doing literally what John Locke wrote about, that you have this unbelievably corrupt government that is trying to tamper with elections, and those people storming the Capitol are literally people who were doing what all the Enlightenment philosophers said you were supposed to do. I
mm.
have to manage that conversation and not
Yeah,
say like what I think, like my job is to get them to learn how to think about things, not what to think. So I completely understand where you're coming from. You have to be able to have a dialogue. If you don't have a dialogue, I mean, it's just like a mirror of what we're dealing with in our society, right? Where
yeah,
essentially the news that we get, not it's literally a different reality if you're right or if you're left. Where you're just getting your information that you want to see and you're not even thinking about what the opposite is. In other words, for example, there are plenty of reasons why tariffs can work, and there are plenty of
mm,
reasons why they shouldn't. And your color or your party should not dictate how you think about that. Obviously, what we would want to do, right, in a normal world is have a discussion about those things and make the best possible decision. But we don't
yeah.
live in that world anymore,
No,
which
no.
is really depressing. You
But
know,
definitely no terrorists on podcasts.
no, absolutely.
That's something we can
I mean,
definitely
what are we
agree
gonna
on.
do, Ken? I mean, if things get worse from here, like I feel like you're gonna need to have like episodes about how awful I am, and I'm gonna have episodes about how your podcasts are too long. Like it's
Yeah,
gonna be
no,
a
that's
this is the
so.
world.
It's not going to happen, mate. It's not going to happen on
No,
this
I
show.
know.
Uh, so we'll just move. There's a couple of bits I just want to go through before we move on to the kind of the next
Fire
part of the
away.
show, and that's a couple of acronyms that appear in your kind of bio,
Sure.
and that's the HMGS Next Inc.
Yes.
So just give us a little bit of an idea of what that is and what that does.
Sure. Now, by the way, Kelly is probably gonna. So Kelly couldn't be here because he has to work. I luckily am on break, but he's been ragging on me about this. So some of the stuff in the intro to the show is outdated, and so
Right.
I will explain like the acronym, and then I'll go into like what's different about it for me now because I really do need to. And I apologize to everybody. I do need to like not be lazy, and I need to re-record that intro. Okay, but let's back up. So, okay, first off, if folks overseas are not aware, so HMGS, right, Historical Miniatures Gaming Society, that's existed for a very 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 long
Just, yeah.
time. And what they have done for years and years and years is promote the hobby of wargaming. But I would argue more importantly than that, they really give people a place to play. And it's their legacy is, to me, like very vital. Like if you're thinking about the legacy of wargaming, because really starting, see, I don't want to say the year because I'm going to get it wrong, but basically, how about I frame it this way? As long as I've been alive, um, HMGS East has been running gaming conventions here on the Eastern Seaboard, and there are other groups like HMGS Midwest, Pacific, all those different groups that basically run gaming conventions. And that, because this country is just so gigantic, that it's really, really hard to do what you guys do, which is have like a historical wargaming club of 20 or 30 people. We really can't do that. It's very difficult. So the 3 time a year model of having gaming conventions is really vital. I would argue that it's akin to the way that your clubs kind of, run in the UK, right? So I grew up in that organization, and it's hard to remember the exact year, but I think 2015 or 2016, somewhere around there, I was approached by a few people in the organization. John Speece, like a really good friend of mine, is being one of them, and he was president of HMGS East for a really long time. Him and a few other people kind of saw what I was doing at Hackley. And again, like, I feel like anytime podcasters or people who have like almost like a forward-facing professional kind of thing with wargaming, we always talk about this is like the graying of the hobby, right?
Yeah.
They saw me and well, me too, dude. Like, look at this beard. I look like Obi-Wan Kenobi, before he dies, unfortunately. So they kind of approached me and said, look, you're a young guy, like you're doing crazy things here at school. Can you teach other people how to do that? Right. And I agreed. I said, sure. And as time went on, John and I founded an organization called HMGS Next Gen Inc. And what that organization was set up to do was essentially set up gaming opportunities for kids in libraries, at schools.
Oh, wow.
And I would argue it's been pretty successful. Now here is where my bio, it's a little bit off. So I'm not affiliated with them anymore, in the sense that I don't run events anymore. And I can be very clear why. Let's talk about the events first. What HMGS Next Gen Inc. does is they will, for example, go to Greenwich Library and set up a game night. Parents will be able to sign their kids up. The library pays a fee to the organization, and it's a nonprofit. And kids show up, do some gaming, and it's almost like forming like little gaming clubs, across the area. So where they're at right now is amazing. John, I don't know if he's not retired yet, but he's kind of getting there. And him and a few other folks, like they're running games all over Connecticut. They've got a couple of places in New York, and they've expanded into New Jersey. So it's all of these facilitators that will go and set these games up at libraries. And it has gone really, really, really well. And I would argue too that, the difference between John and I, because this is really what it comes down to, I just don't have the time. Like even though I don't have kids, like on purpose, like my wife and I, we're too selfish, but I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that more like even though I know she's not particularly well liked anymore, but like almost like in the Ayn Rand, like virtue of selfishness. Like it was just never something I wanted. But even though I have a lot of time, I don't, because of all the different things I do. And also too, for me, I got a little bit burnt out. It's like, I'm working with kids all week and then devoting a day every weekend to running more games for kids.
Well,
that's where it became too much for me, But they're doing absolutely wonderfully. And let me tell you, John, not only has John always been a really good game master, but he's even better now. He runs probably better than me. Like he runs ridiculously good games for kids. And even though he's such a humble guy, he doesn't really do interviews, even though I've poked him before about doing it. But like, he's so good at like knowing where kids are at and knowing how to build games for them. It's a real skill. So they're doing absolutely wonderfully. I try to plug them. I'm glad you asked about this, because I try to plug them as much as I can, because really what it comes down to is we do need to do something in terms of getting more, young people involved. Now, at the same time, and this is, again, a kind of a controversial subject, but like, even when I was a kid in the late 80s, there weren't a lot of kids, at gaming cons. I don't think the older I get, I don't think that historical wargaming is always the most inviting for like a young person, which we could
It
talk
can be
about that.
difficult. Yeah, it
Right. We
can be
could talk
difficult.
about that a little bit
Mm.
later, but that all of that being said, I do think one of the ways to kind of get into that demographic is through things like next gen, because I can assure you kids have gone from playing in John's games or playing in my games and they go to the conventions, here in the States. Like even last year, even though I'm not going to lie to you, it was honestly one of the most weird, surreal experiences of my life
Yeah,
to have my former students buying me beer
weird.
and to literally be sitting there getting my ass kicked by my former students who are in their
Mm.
20s. It was so weird, Ken. Like, but that's the point, right? Like they're coming to cons, they're getting to experience things, and some of the old grognards, get to kind of look and see the next generation of gamers. So I think the program works. Is important to me.
Yeah, it's a fantastic thing to hear. One of the big things, like you say, that people always go about is the grain of the hobby, and that bringing people in. And we've talked about it on the show before with putting games on in unusual locations, museums. We have a big podcast in the UK, a World War II podcast, and they do like a weekend. We have ways of we have ways is what it's called, and wargamers have got into that weekend festival, and all it takes is that little spark, isn't it, to then bring people into the hobby, because we're not that good at self-generating interest, and it's all down to individuals with drive and goals to get people involved rather than an overall arching authority who looks after things.
Yeah, well, look, do you want to have do you want, we can go into this. I do have thoughts on it. I mean, or
Yeah,
we could shelve it for a little later. Like, that's up to you.
yeah.
It's your show. So,
I'll talk about anything, mate.
well, look, I think here's the issue. That to me, this
Yeah,
is what the issue is. All right. So, and again, like you could play a drinking game, based on how often I talk about this, but gaming in general is growing like it has never been before. And I would
yeah,
argue companies like Warlord are too, right? But the fact is, right, is that if you look at every other, I would call it genre of gaming, board gaming, cards, sci-fi miniatures gaming, fantasy gaming, all of that, it seems like they just have so much more of a natural inroad with young people, right? Because you could go to any hobby store and find Warhammer, right?
yeah,
And here's the thing, the way that those companies are set up is so different than what we have to do. So, meaning, if you want to play Warhammer or if you want to get into board gaming, you go to the store and it is so fucking easy to get into it. And there is a company that makes a lot of money. They make all the dice, they make all the measuring implements, they do everything. One stop shop. That is totally the opposite of the way I grew up. The way I grew up, it's like, oh, I want to play Napoleonics. All right. Well, here's a dozen different rule sets to choose from. That not it's and rule sets that are not written by a company, right? It's just some
mm,
dude, right? Who published a game. It's probably not even laid out nicely, right? And it's a mom and pop kind of thing. Then I've got to figure out the manufacturer. Then I've got to figure out what scale. And sometimes rules don't go with certain scales. So, in a
yeah,
way, what I'm trying to say, we have not made it easy on people to get in. And if we want that to change, we have to change. And to the credit of companies like Warlord, right? And even though Mantic Games is more like obviously in like fantasy and things like that,
mm,
I think you're starting to see more. And I'm not even saying I like the games. I'm just saying you're starting to see more companies that have money that are following that model. And is it really that shocking that those are the companies that are drawing new people in, So I think we need to get our shit together as historical wargamers to some
mm,
extent and break out of that antiquated model, even though there are some really great things about that model. I
mm,
like being able to pick the game I want. For example, I would never, ever play 40K. I think those rules are horrendous. They are
Yeah, they're not
not.
brilliant.
And also, I've talked to enough people that worked for them. They don't give a shit about their rules. They're literally designing the next edition before the newest edition has come out. It's all about just making money, which again, like I get, but as a gamer, I don't like that. I would much rather have 10 different choices of rules to play with my 40K figures, you know? So I'm not saying that like there aren't things about that model that I like, but if we're just strictly talking about ease of getting somebody into the hobby, I do think that you need more companies like Warlord or more historical companies. I'll give you another one, like ESR, that Napoleonic company.
Yeah, yeah.
They're a very modern company and they know what they're doing. And I think that does need to be a path forward.
Hmm. Another thing as well that historical wargaming doesn't really get a grip of is things like every new sci-fi series that comes out has got a game that's attached to it. I don't know whether you've had Fallout in the US.
Yep.
Yeah, so the Expanse, they all generate computer games, role-playing games, miniatures games, and people get swept up in the euphoria of watching the series, get involved in that game. But we never seem to do that with, historicals. Probably the worst example possible, but Ridley Scott's Napoleon. There
Oh, don't
wasn't.
get me started, dude.
Yeah, don't get me started on that as well. But let's just spend reality for a second and say that that was a really good historically based movie, and there was a game tied to it. And then people started to get into Napoleonics, and I think
Absolutely.
that, yeah, and
I've never
the
thought
fact,
about that.
yeah, the fact that it's an absolutely shit film,
Well, but here's the
yeah.
thing, right? Like we're at a disadvantage because again,
Mm,
here's the crazy part, right? I mean, every other type of gaming like could do what you're talking about. So again, Napoleon comes out. It's an awesome movie. Somebody buys the rights to it, puts out a board game about it. Somebody gets the rights to it, builds a collectible card game around it. I think it's just harder, I think, for miniatures companies.
mm,
I'm not saying that it's impossible, but like how many more times can somebody buy Napoleonic figures, right? Like, and if you think about the people, I mean, unless we're just talking about literally bringing entirely new people in, right? If you're talking about that, then that's certainly a possibility. Like, for example, Warlord Games putting out like a Ridley Scott Napoleon game. Let's put in a couple hundred figures into a box. That is a way to get somebody in, absolutely. But I think for some companies, what they're probably worried about, and maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I there's a very good possibility I am, but like, for some other companies, it's like, would Jared Fishman or Ken, right? Ken Riley, right? Like, would you go and buy that box set for $100 or $120 when you've got 10,000 Napoleonics in your basement? And if you're just talking about writing a set of rules about the movie, well, I already have 10 other sets of rules, and you're
mm.
not going to make that much money on it. So it's a fucking conundrum. It really is.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't even fault these companies. It's really difficult. I mean, look, here's the thing. It's a miracle that Warlord is even able to do what they're going to do because they do put out new editions and it's like, I guess every couple of years it's a new box set of Germans. Like, how exciting is that? It's not the same thing as Warhammer where it's like, I'm going to come out with an entirely new race. I'm going to build an entirely new troop type that you don't have. I think it's way harder to build a sustainable system as a historical
Mm.
miniatures company. That's what I think.
Yeah, no, without a shadow of a doubt. And I've just thought of a really good one.
Yeah,
So if I make millions, you heard it here first.
yeah,
But saving Private Ryan. What you don't need a lot of figures. You can go through the scenarios in the film. I made a million. I think just putting a damper on it. But what I think the problem is licensing.
sure.
um, because I don't know, I'm not the economist or a financial expert, but I don't know how
people manage to get the funding to get the licensing for these kind of games. There's a company in the UK called Mongoose who have been they're quite infamous, probably more than famous, for getting a license, bringing a game out, then the license runs out, they can't afford to renew it, so they ditch it. Starship Troopers, Babylon 5 are the two examples that I can think of. So there's obviously a cost involved with that licensing, and where the sci-fi stuff get their money from, I don't know, but there are obviously more backers.
I think so, yeah. But you know what? I'll also say this too, right?
Hmm.
I don't know. Like, I don't know if the graying of the hobby is the same in the UK as it is here, right? Because I don't know, man. When I went to Salute last year, there were a lot of people there, and there was a decent range of people who, they might be retired, a decent group of people that are your age and my age,
Hmm.
definitely some people in their 20s, maybe it's just because of the fact that, again, like, maybe it's just a little bit easier for wargamers to get from place to place in the UK, whereas
Hmm.
in the States, it's just, it's just such a gigantic country. That being said, right, I do notice it here. I think it is abundantly clear that if you look at HMGS cons, there are way less people running games. There are way less people around. It's definitely not the same as it was, when I was growing up, and it could be for a whole variety of different reasons. But I think it's pretty clear that some of those guys, and I say the word guys because it's just so male dominated, but like, I think a lot of those guys that used to run those games, those huge games, I think a lot of them, they're starting to get into their 70s, and it's like, I don't have the energy or maybe
Hmm.
the physical ability, because it's not like, again, like, I, I sort of saw a little bit of it at Salute, but we're not the healthiest bunch of people, right?
True,
So it's
true.
like, for some folks, it could be like mobility issues. And I think the issue is, and maybe I'll pose it as a question, right?
Hmm.
To run the big game, you need to be devoted. Like, you need to really paint a lot of minis. And I think the way that the hobby is kind of going is that's a really big ask for people. Not everybody's going to do that. So when we were talking earlier about those skirmish games, it's a little bit easier for somebody to be like, all right, well, I'm going to paint 30 figures aside, and that's the game I'm going to run at a con. And they think that you couple that with ages going up, and you're gonna see smaller games, you're gonna see less people. But I don't know if that's the case in the UK. I did not get that feeling.
Yeah, it's a trend, but then there are still lots of people out there who do the larger game in the UK, and it kind of went underground a little bit. It seems to be coming out a bit more now, but and I think that was just driven purely by the commercial releases from companies. Every set of rules was a 10-figure skirmish game, and I get the box set idea. It's just not my bag. So I'm not putting it all down to me, but I started shouting, going, "Hang on a minute! Look at this! It's
Yeah.
brilliant!"
Well, it's about money, right? I think that's what it is, right? I think a lot of these companies are, and again, like, I've talked to most of the people that work for Warlord. They're ridiculously
Mm,
cool people. Like, they invited me to come to, like, to Nottingham to, like, see, like, their production and all that. I just never got around to do it just because of my schedule. But look, the fact of the matter is, right? I mean, all those dudes are ex-GW people. Like, GW is the company that makes money. So GW does the same thing. Like, so it's not a surprise that, we're pushing for games that have smaller accounts, because miniature accounts, because ultimately, the companies are like, well, what are people going to spend? What are people going to buy? So it's easier to get people in that way. But it might not necessarily be like the kind of game that you or I are looking for. Because again, like, Bolt Action, I really like that game, and I really like it for kids in particular. I love the dice system.
yeah,
I think the work that Alessio did and Rick did, like, I think it's awesome, and I think it's really innovative, right? Um, but at the same time, am I gonna put together a little army and play in a tournament? No, like,
no.
that's not gonna happen. Like, that's not what I enjoy. Like, I don't. I just am past that point in my life where, like, because this is another thing, right? I think the market is driven by the competitive gaming scene. And I couldn't give a shit about any of that, right? Like the idea of building my little army list and going to the game, and it's just not for me,
Not me neither.
Yeah, no, I suspected that.
So we shall carry on the space-related theme. It's
Sure.
coming. HMGS Next Gen, Star Trek. And then the other one is NASAGA, which sounds like a branch of NASA, but I'm going to be disappointed here. I'm going to be disappointed here, aren't I, Jared? You are not
Probably
visiting Mars anytime soon.
No, I can explain what NASAGA is. So it's North American Simulations and Games Association. So here's basically what they are. They're kind of like, the best way to describe it is they're kind of like a think tank for people from like all walks of life, and what brings everybody together is the use of games in whatever it is that one does. So for example, like using games in the classroom, using games in the workplace, using games as a skill builder, in some cases being the manufacturer of games. So how I got connected with NASAGA. So again, this is roughly probably 2016 or 2017. Where I worked at the time, Hackley, what kind of went down was the people that I worked for kind of said to me, we really want you to explore this whole gaming as a pedagogy or a form of pedagogy. We want you to explore this a little bit more. And what they did was they gave a grant to myself, another teacher that I work with, and he gets weird about his name coming up on podcasts, even though he's like my partner in crime, like in terms of like developing games and things like that. But so a colleague of mine that teaches English, I'll just say his name is Mike. We'll leave it at that.
Mike. Okay.
And another gentleman that worked at the school who really wasn't a game guy, but he saw the power of games because he ran the summer program. And my gaming club over the summer was always like one of the most popular things. So we basically took a year to explore how games really could be used in the classroom. And he's the one that found this organization. So again, like what they do is they hold a 3 or 4 day conference every year. And it's led by like a very dedicated group of people. And you gather together, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 people, from all over the country. And you literally talk games for 4 days. You run workshops, you take seminars. And man, you want to talk about a high functioning group of people. This is them. So, so just awesome people. So again, like long story short, and it's a little bit hard to remember, but I think the first one that we went to was in Rochester. Mike and I went there just as, if my memory serves right, I think we just went as spectators. So like we did the workshops. And let me explain what I mean by workshop. Like somebody has a game that they use at the hospital to like simulate what an emergency room is like, or somebody has developed a classroom game trying to get kids to like understand Greek philosophy, things along those lines.
Yeah.
So, so the first year we did it, it was great. We had a great time. Then the next year, Mike and I took a classroom game that I used about the Roman Empire, actually technically about the Roman Republic. And again, without boring people, but it was basically like a role-playing simulation where, so again, this is kind of off the top of my head, but like, so Ptolemaic Egypt and the Antigonid dynasty, Antiochus. So they had all of those problems during the Roman Republic. And there is that true story of where the drawing a line in the sand comes from, where an ambassador named Popilius went to the desert and intervened in their conflict. And when one of the kings wouldn't back down, he drew the circle around him and basically was like, look, if you don't listen to me and you leave that circle, fair enough, do whatever you want, but like, we're going to take your civilization apart brick by brick. I took that and turned it on its head and turned it into a leadership game, where essentially what I said was, what if Popilius didn't have the Senate's approval to do this and went rogue and just did this on their own? Yeah. And we have a trial for Popilius. and every
Ooh.
player in the game gets a role, and they have a character background, and it's a big role-playing simulation where they all have to kind of figure out, was this a heroic thing? Is this guy a villain? Is this a good thing for Rome? Is it a bad thing? And it was awesome. And what we did was
It sounds brilliant.
it was great. And what we did
Yeah.
was we turned it, and this is why I like to give Mike credit, because he came up with a couple of ideas that I didn't think of. So just as an example, if you really want to nerd out,
Yeah.
every character starts with a rating, and what that rating represents is essentially their prestige. It represents like their voice. It basically like represents like their virtue, essentially. That score can go up and down over the course of the game, because the more good things you say, if somebody gives you like a little star to put on your name tag,
Oh yeah.
it means that your virtue, your gravitas, that's what we called it, kind of goes up, which means when you vote, you have a more powerful voice. So he came up with
A bit like working at McDonald's then.
kind of, yeah. I mean, that's why it's a great game, right? Like, so then, like, you know, they all talk about this, and then they get to ask Papilius questions, and I play Papilius. So they sit there and grill me, and I make myself out to be this hero. So we won an award at that. We won like this Rising Star Award because of how awesome the seminar was. Now, this is all a long-winded way of me saying they asked me to serve on their board of directors. After that was over and we went to Montreal the following year, they basically wanted like my help on the board to kind of push the organization forward. I am not on the board anymore. That's the part that I need to change in my bio. So I served on their board for a year, but because of the podcast and a few other reasons, what I basically do for them now is the way, or like maybe I'll phrase it this way, the way I help the organization is they post my podcast to get more people thinking about gaming, meaning for their membership. Like they get to hear interviews and things from me, interviewing people that go to Nasaga or have worked with them. And that's kind of my way of helping, because again, like with all the stuff I do, it's just, it just became too much, you know, but I'm still very much affiliated with them. And I do my best to get to their conferences. But again, like there's only so many conferences I'm allowed to go to. Cause like in the private school world, you can't really take time off. It doesn't work that way, you know, because we already get a lot of time off anyway. So I do my best to still kind of get to their conferences, but they're wonderful people. And if you're listening to this episode, definitely check them out. Like go and Google them. You know, it's basically like nasaga.org, and you can kind of see what they're all about.
And make sure you type it all in.
Yes.
Or else you're learning about the Mars lander.
Yeah, and yes, this is true. Like nobody's going to Mars, you know.
or something falling over on the moon, which I did think was quite hilarious.
Yes.
As an engineer, to get something that far, to get it to land on the moon and then it falls over.
Pretty comical.
It's just the funniest thing. I'm sorry to any people who are listening who might have been involved in that, but
whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, it was. It made me giggle anyway.
I mean, you got to take responsibility for your actions too. But then again, who knows? I mean, I don't know anything about like how that works. I mean, it may have just been like an accident. Who knows?
Well, true, but you would have thought that standing upright would have been something that we've studied for long enough.
No, that's definitely true. It's not like we've never been there before, even though there are some crackpots, you know, that'll make that argument, you know. So
and I think the previous one fell over as well. So I would have personally modified the design.
So well, maybe we can cross our fingers. Maybe Elon will help with that, right? He seems to be helping with a lot these days.
Yeah.
Are you catching my sarcasm?
Maybe we could do a game. Maybe we could do a game.
Probably.
Yeah, I'm sure there's one. I'm sure there's one out there already. So we'll just finish off this hour and 40-minute long introduction with.
I told you I can match you. I can match your energy.
Anytime. So the Venn diagram of wargaming is one of the main parts of our show that has been in for forever, and that's where I kind of get people. You know, I think I've got an idea from the conversation that we've had, but when you think of a Venn diagram with wargamer, painter, collector, and historian. Those are your kind of your four bubbles. how does it interlap for yourself? How do those links join up?
So I know it's probably cliche, but I really do feel like I do all of those things. I don't know if I would say that I like all of them equally. So maybe I'll tackle it that way. I'm a pretty good painter. Like I would say I'm above average, but truthfully, are you ready? I'm going to offend you. Don't be offended at me, Ken.
I'm never offended.
Don't think less of me. I'm
Yeah.
not a giant fan of painting. I'm not one of those people who gets some kind of ridiculous joy out of somebody coming to my table and be like, oh my God, like that figure is gorgeous. Like that's never really been me. I've gotten plenty of compliments, but like that's not really what drives me. Collector, I would argue that that's a big part of what I do. I love collecting things. I love being able to go down to my basement and I love looking at, I know it's like ridiculous, but I love looking at the boxes. I love seeing the boxes everywhere. For me, it always is kind of about the project. So it's like if you're thinking about that Venn diagram, right? I think for me, like my joy really comes from I pick a project and I get it from point A to point B, and with point B being the gaming table, right?
Yeah.
And being able to put that game on. And even if I never look at that collection again, or I don't look at that collection for years, the collection part is really important. Now, the history part, I think that was more important for me earlier on when I didn't know much. I feel like again, don't get me wrong. I always go back and do more research. Like I enjoy reading about battles, but if you ask me about the Venn diagram, that would have been a much bigger part of my whole gaming thing, like earlier on, compared with the way it is now. Like if I'm gonna run a battle about the Somme, I know about the Somme. You know, if I need to learn more, and you could probably see like behind me. I mean, I've got a massive collection of books. I definitely enjoy going back in, but not as much as I used to. So again, like if we're thinking about like my arc or like what's important to me, right? Yes, the history is important, but I would put that alongside the painting. To me, and I don't even know if you mentioned it, right? But to me, it's really all about the game. It's all about the game. It's all about the scenario. To me, like what gets my blood moving more than anything else about this hobby is I want to create an experience for somebody. I want people to be able to sit down and have their brains hurt in a good way when they're sitting down and playing one of my games. So I'll give you an example. Last summer, and I know that, like, I apologize to your audience. It probably sounds like I'm a fucking egomaniac. I don't know, but like, at Historicon, I won my first Pella Award from HMGS for the game that I ran last summer. It was basically like a Hollywood-style Sword in the Flame game set in the Second Anglo-Afghan War, basically in Afghanistan or like northern India. What gets my blood going was like making that scenario. So like balancing the rules, thinking of really interesting victory objectives, play testing it, like kind of like intellectualizing it with my crew of playtesters, like really working hard to try to get that scenario to where I want it to be. That is really nowadays it's the most fun for me, because again, if you came to my basement, don't get me wrong, there are plenty of people that have more miniatures than me. But I'm at the point where, I mean, I don't even know what I'm going to like. I mean, I'm a young guy, but like when I drop dead, like I have no idea what's going to happen to this stuff. I mean, I have a lot of miniatures, Ken, like a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm at the point where like that whole collecting part and having to buy stuff and paint stuff, it's like for the periods that I have and own, like I have what I need. So it's really more about executing that really great game, you know? And again, like, do you know Wargames Atlantic?
Yes.
Okay, they're coming along, man. Like as a company, the blood got a little bit boiling, right? Because I'm going to contradict everything I just said, right? Like probably because it's in my nature, but like I saw their 10 mil samurai.
Yes.
It just came out.
Mm-hmm.
And again, like I started going down the path, like thinking about Sekigahara, thinking about those miniatures, thinking about like going on Amazon and looking for books. So I'm just a hypocritical asshole. Point being, like there are times where I will get a new project, but largely I have so much stuff that like I focus more on running a game. That's kind of my answer.
Yeah. Now I can see where you're coming from with that, and it was a question I was going to bring up was is there anything that kind of suddenly sparks your interest that you go back into the history books to look at? Because that's
Well,
one thing that
yes.
that's one thing I've enjoyed with some new projects is when something just comes out of nowhere,
Yeah.
like the Garibaldi stuff. And I know a bit, but I don't know a lot because I love enjoying learning the history. And if there's not a lot of new history that I don't know, so to find something, it's like all
Yeah, for
hands to
me
the
it's
pump.
Japan.
Yeah.
And it goes
Yeah.
back again, like, we were talking earlier about TV shows, right? Shogun, the TV show. I don't know if you
Yeah.
got a chance
Wow.
to watch it. I
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
enjoyed it. So I'm sure that that's playing a role in my thinking. But again, like the older you get, it's all about like time. It's not really about money. I'm very lucky, like I'm well paid, like I have a great job and everything. It's more about time, and I usually will kind of talk myself into a new project a year, uh
Hmm.
and kind of like planned around Historicon, where I know that I really want to run something, and if I don't have it or if I need to add something, it's usually this time of year where I'll make my purchases, and then usually June and early July is when I do all my painting and things like that. But I don't paint nearly as much as I used to. I used to paint a lot more, but that's when I didn't have anything. So I guess maybe here's a way to phrase it, right? Coming full circle.
Hmm.
Maybe the new project is also kind of a thing that does it for me, because the truth is, like, if I look at the last 2 or 3 years, every single summer I've had a new project. So like there was one summer where I did Bellow Wood, so I painted up Germans and Americans. Then I did my Afghanistan project where I built terrain because I already had all the figures. And now I'm starting to lean towards that samurai idea. So who knows? Like maybe after we're done recording, I'll go and order everything. I don't know. We'll see.
Look out, Wargames Atlantic.
No,
Here
they're
comes a big
great.
order.
Like, I think they've
Yeah.
really come a long way. Like, because I remember they used to get critiqued a lot for their early sculpts. I don't know how you feel about plastic miniatures either. Personally, I'm not a huge fan. I like getting my solid piece of lead. I really don't like having to put things together. Again, like if we're thinking about time. But that being said, their sculpts are really getting good. And
Hmm.
it just makes me happy to see a new company that's really starting to get traction. That makes me really happy.
Yeah, they kind of started with like a scattergun approach all over the place, but
Yeah.
they're now getting more of a range where people are getting stuff and they're getting top people on board, like Paul Hicks to sculpt the new stuff so it looks a lot better. But I always say with plastic figures is that I enjoy them so much more when I buy them. So I spend like 20 or 40 quid on a couple of boxes, and then I'll buy the equivalent in metal, and it'll cost me 3, 4 times as much. That then flips when I come to put them together and paint them, because I'm then spending hours going, fucking, where does this head,
No,
you know,
absolutely.
whatever.
I feel exactly the same way you do, right? Because
Yeah.
look, when I was at Salute last year, I bought a ton of Perry Sudan plastics, and they're really, really, really good looking. Like they look
Mm.
great painted up, but like I just don't want to put them together, And my friends will mock me and be like, "Ah, you're so fucking lazy," yada yada yada. But
Yeah.
like, I don't know. Like, I'm a big fan of like Old Glory. Old Glory is such a mainstay for me. All my World War II, my 25s, like almost every 25 millimeter figure I own, the majority of them come from there. The trick though with them is like, again, this is a pet peeve of mine. Like, I hate adding weapons to figures. I
Yeah.
hate gluing pieces, and I especially hate doing like spears and having to add the tips or and again, like part of the reason I got the plastics was because for some of those Old Glory sculpts, you do have to like drill holes in hands, and I hate doing any of that stuff.
Yeah, it's a pain in the backside. And a special mention here for Rubicon. Do you have Rubicon miniatures in the
No, I
US?
don't. Well, I've never actually
Yeah,
heard of them.
yeah, they do really really nice sculpts, and what they're famous for is they'll do like a box for a certain tank, and there will be like 12 different variants you can build from that box. So they're very good on making the most out of a kit. Well,
That's great.
I bought some of their Vietnam 28mm stuff recently, and they make it from some weird plastic, and it says you need to use this special type of glue, ABS it's called. Fuck me, all they do is I build them, and I thought they look really nice them, and then I look at them and they just fall apart,
Yeah,
even with the special
that's
glue.
brutal.
So
By the
so
way, Vietnam, man, let me tell you about game design, right? Vietnam, man, that's the conflict where I'm waiting for somebody to really put out a perfect set of rules for that period. It's so tough.
yeah.
I'm not. You know what's so funny?
Mm.
You hit on a interesting little aside. They were all sitting on my table downstairs. I have a really nice collection of 15 mil Battlefront, but it was like one of those things where I have tried so many different games, and I feel like that's going to be one of those I have to make my own rules for, just because
Yeah.
it's just really tough, really, really, really tough. Have you ever seen the PBS documentary on Vietnam?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
God, what a powerful documentary!
Multi
Yeah, it's
episode one with all the
what's his name, Ken Burns.
Ken Burns. Yeah.
What a great documentary! Like highly, highly recommended. I just started rewatching it the other day. What a fucking sad conflict, right?
Yeah.
That's like one of the saddest.
Tragic in so many ways. I think Ken Burns is one of those things, isn't it? His American Civil War documentary series and the Vietnam, they're just absolute classics, very much like the World at War, which was, it was 50s, maybe 60s, and there was still enough people left from the conflict on both sides that they could interview during the course of the series. And of course it had I can't remember, Laurence Olivier or Johnny Gielgud who did the narration.
Yeah.
But that narration is just, as soon as you hear the voice and the series, and it has like a flame flickering down over the titles, and it's just like wow. And the Vietnam one is just absolutely amazing.
Vietnam seems a little out of your wheelhouse, though, no? Or was that something that you really, really kind of want to game? Or
it's something that I've done quite a lot in the past at 20 mil, and I just saw these figures and quite liked them, and I hadn't bought anything at the show. So yeah, it was a dip in the toe back into the water, or something that we did quite extensively.
What rules do you use?
We had our own set of rules, very similar to yourself, in that
Yeah.
we struggled to find anything. I don't know whether you've seen it. There's a new board game out called Purple Haze.
No, I haven't seen it.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting me.
Hold on. I'm gonna have to write this down. Hold on a second.
Yeah.
Ken, why are you doing this to me, dude? So you're costing me money. Like, that's how I see this. What was it called? It was called
Purple Haze.
Got it. All right, I'm writing this down as you speak.
No
okay,
worries.
cool.
And it's kind of, I don't do a lot of board gaming, but this one's kind of perked my interest, and it kind of, it's down at squad level. You have individual guys. You have an overall mission. You have a mission map, which is like a topographical map of the area. There's objectives on it. There's things that move. Then you have a tactical map as well, and it just seems to work really well. It's like a half role-playing game, half war game.
That's cool.
Yeah, and it does look. I've seen a couple of playthroughs from it, and I've not sent my money off yet. That's
so
Yorkshire
are you?
out.
Yeah. So are you thinking of taking that and turning it into almost like a miniatures game?
Yeah, potentially.
That's cool.
Yeah. So we'll see. You never know.
Yeah, we'll have to check it out.
But what I need, Rubicon, is for me fucking figures to stay together first.
No, it's very frustrating. You know what's so funny? Like, it's funny what us wargamers care about and the things that we talk about, because it's like we could probably have an hour conversation about the kind of glue to use, right? Like,
yeah, exactly.
because you're right. Like, there's nothing more frustrating when you kind of buy a different type of glue and you realize too late that it doesn't work and all your shit falls apart. Or even boxes. Like on Christmas morning, it's like, yeah, I'm looking at the cool shit that I got, but more often than not, I'm like, how can I use that box? Like, what could I put in that? Like, what kind of terrain could go in that box?
Yeah. Well, my wife has these really expensive items of clothing called from a company called Fairfax and Favour. They do stuff for the royal family and what have you, but they have the most amazing boxes. So she'll go, oh, I fancy a new pair of Fairfax and Favour boots for Christmas. I go, oh, no worries, love, I'll get them.
It's great.
Can I have the box?
No, that's great. I remember back in the day, like, cigar boxes were
Yes.
quite the thing in the States, And of course, like as a little kid, I never knew what they were, but it was always like really expensive cigars, because miniatures used to fit so nicely. Nowadays, it's like, I don't know. I find it kind of lame. Like, when people will spend like $500 on one of those, like, those bags with everything is fucking magnetized. And, by the way, I hope my job doesn't listen to this. See, my students stalk me. And if you're listening right now, I love you, but you're a creep. Kids stalk me all the time. So it's like, they're going to really get to see how foul my mouth really is and how because I'm like a teddy bear in the classroom. Like, I'm the nicest guy in the world, except in my public, more of like my private life, I'm a savage, But it really does drive me crazy. Everything is magnetized. It's just so silly. Like, back in the day, we used to buy like tackle boxes and like put our miniatures in, And yes, if you're wondering, can I feel better than other people for that?
Yeah. So if somebody suggested to me not that long ago on Facebook, oh, you need, because I had an issue with a water leak that got into some figures and they went mouldy, and they said, oh well, what you need is magnetic basing system and do this. So it's like, yeah, that's fucking great if you've got 10 figures.
Absolutely.
I've got 30,000 Figures. I'd have to work another 10 years to get that.
Yeah, no, totally. Stuff. I don't think, look, when I moved into this house, like the hardest part by far was moving my miniatures collection. I mean, and again, you definitely have more figures than I do. So I can't even imagine what that would be like. I had to get a U-Haul. Like, it was both a very proud moment and also an unbelievably sad moment. Where it's like, my, just transporting my miniatures collection. And then I was thinking, like, I'm never moving this stuff again. So it's like, if we do decide to move, it's like, I had better hope to like make some more money because I'm not selling this house. I'm not doing this again. Like, even if this house becomes like the gaming house, like, God willing, if I'd be able to pull that off, and the wife and I, but
yeah,
I digress.
Superb. Well, what we're going to do now is let the older people go for a wee because they'll desperately need one after 2 hours, and we'll take a short little break and then we'll come back for part 2 in a moment.
Alrighty.
Okay, so an extended part 1. Let's see how part 2 gets on. And part 2 really is our little big game chat, because that's kind of what this show has always been about, is the bigger game. And, different people have different perspectives on it. So I always like to, even if it's only 10 minutes or so, I'm guessing this won't be.
This is your fault, though. Like, this is your format. Like, I can go, dude.
I'll just talk to anyone for as long as I don't care. I really don't care.
I look at this as a very special episode. We'll have to, I'll argue that that's why we're talking so much. Yeah, we just get along,
Exactly. So there's no issues at all. So yeah, the big games then. So I always like to get what your thoughts are, or what my guest thoughts are when I say big game. What do you see in your mind?
Sure, I think they're very special. That's what I would say. I don't know if I would want every single game at a con to be the big game. I think that they should be special and unique in their own way.
Yep.
So some of my earliest memories of like the concept of a big game. So there was and I've talked about this on my own show before, there was a hobby shop that was near Lancaster, and it was called Jenkintown Hobby. And some of my earliest memories of the idea of a big game were from that store. Because what they would do is they would come to the con, and it's hard to remember what day it would be, probably Friday or Saturday, and they would put on a big game. And when I say a big game, I mean like, you're going for 8 hours, a
Nice.
really, really big game.
Mm.
And I played in 2 of them. So from a very early age, like this was kind of set in my mind that this is something that's important. So here's what they would look like. What I want you to imagine is really kind of like a number of 6x5 tables, all kind of connected together. Sometimes they would literally have a space in the middle where the GMs could stand, right?
Yeah.
So that they could get to places easy. Every year it was like a themed game, and not always exactly historical. So for example, the game that I remember more than any other was a big pirate game where
Yeah.
all the players either were playing pirates or they were playing essentially Boxer Rebellion era Imperial forces with machine guns and artillery and infantry. Every player, it was Sword of the Flame rules, every player had like 3 or 4 units, and it was all in 15 mil, not 25s. And it's almost the opposite of the kind of game I like today in the sense that there were no victory conditions. Like you made your own story, meaning
Yeah.
I've got 4 units and I'm in a village and all these pirates show up and I have to figure out what to do. Am I going to hold the village? Am I going to try to march to the next one? Am I going to go up to the hill? And, you just have stories that kind of, again, get etched into your brain when you're playing games like this. So I can remember very clearly, and this was like 30 years ago, just to be clear, I can remember charging the pirates and them retreating and falling back into the sea and getting eaten by sharks. I remember my command being utterly devastated, and like I
Mm.
spent most of the game trying to climb the mountain to get away from the pirates. And that tells you something about the power of the big game, right? And you're interacting with people. There might be a note or a message coming to you, passed to you from the GM, from somebody on the other side of the table. There's just something really, really special about that, So to me, big games are unique, and big games are almost like in their own genre. That's
Yeah.
their own medium, like in the same way as like somebody would have a style of painting. That's my take on the big game.
Yeah. And do you see when you're playing, let's take a board game, for example, where something covers big in a different way, where it covers like a big theatre of operations or a big period of time. Do you still see that as a big game, or are you drawn to
No,
the figure stuff?
no, no.
Yeah.
To me, when I hear the phrase big game, it's not the scale or the scope.
Mm.
It's fucking lead on the table. And
Yeah.
you could see that I'm old, like just even using, because figures aren't lead anymore, but like
Yeah.
you want to feel something when you're pushing those miniatures across the table,
Yeah.
You want to see rank after rank after rank of Roman legionnaires, or rank after rank of Gaelic warrior. Like that's
Yeah.
what a big game is to me. It's more about the amount of figures, like the amount of table space, the amount of players, you know again, like it's almost like big, like Texas, like that's kind of what I think of when I think of the big
Yeah.
game.
So the spectacle of it then is very important for you.
Yes,
Yeah,
it should
that's what I like.
stop the show. Like it should be the kind of thing that like when people are walking through, they stop at your table, and again, don't get me wrong, like you could have a show stopping 2x2 like diorama type game where
Mm.
10 figures per side, but it's not the same thing as, you know, playing Waterloo man to man, or like, you know what I mean? Like just
Yeah.
the big, 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 big style of war game.
I always think that those smaller games, especially at conventions, tend to get a little bit lost. There was some absolutely amazing stuff at Salute that was on relatively small, say 4x4 tables, that when you look at a photograph, you look at it and you go, wow, that is absolutely amazing. But then when you see it in real life compared to, my mate Simon Miller with his massive long
Oh, he's a legend.
ranks,
Yeah,
yeah,
he's great.
with his massive long phalanxes and stuff, and that draws your eye across a massive hallway.
Yeah. Look, I don't know what kind of music you like, Ken.
A bit of. So I'm a classic rock, metal pre-hair metal.
Okay, so like Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, like
Yeah,
that
yeah.
era. Okay, look, so again, like nobody's gonna tell me otherwise. Like
Mm,
musicians nowadays, because I'm a musician as well. It's one thing to get up there and have a little shitty combo amp, even a high end combo amp, a little
mm,
thing that you could stand on. And it's
mm.
another thing to have a Marshall stack behind you. Bigger sometimes is just better. Like
Yeah.
there might not even be a tangible reason why. It's just if I'm playing guitar live, I want to be surrounded by amplifiers. It's
Yes.
just cool. Like in the same way that the big game, like it's
Mm,
just a cool thing to see. It's always
yeah.
going to be better and look better than something small. And I know that's offensive, but it's just people might not want to admit it, but it's true.
Yeah. It's a bit like Spinal Tap. We're always going to go to 11.
Oh, absolutely. Right. Absolutely. Totally.
Oh, brilliant. So, in the US, you have a thing called the State of the Nation. So what kind of would be the state of the nation for the big game in the US at the moment?
You know, First off, I want to compliment you on your show notes, right? You're a far more like diligent podcast host than I am. So like this morning over coffee, I was thinking about it. And I don't know,
Yeah.
man. I have sort of a mixed impression of this. And it's sometimes, as good as my memory is, perspective might be different. So on one hand, I'm somewhat inclined to say that there are less big games now than there were before. But I don't know if that's true. Meaning there are still a hell of a lot of big games that happen in the States. I think objectively, there are fewer games in general, but
Hmm.
there are still plenty of people that are putting on big games. And I'm happy to talk about them because like I
Yeah.
really I did my homework. I sat down and like pulled out the old
Good
pen.
lad. Good lad.
Yeah. So I mean, if we're thinking about like that connection to like the idea of like what Jenkintown was doing in the late 80s early 90s, so here are some people and some things that I've seen recently that are like that. So first off, the Little Wars TV guys put on a great big game, and I know that
Mm,
you've interviewed them
fantastic.
before.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're like in that category of gamer where it's like they're definitely not the old guard. I don't think that they
Mm,
are in the same way that I like this is a compliment to you. Like I don't think you're the old guard either. Like I think all of us collectively are trying to push this agenda forward. But like last summer, I mean I could talk about any one of their games. But last summer they put on a gorgeous, gorgeous Russo-Japanese war game. I think it was Miles. And it was small figures but massive. Like so many units, trenches, like beautiful table and a big table. They must have had like 10 players and they ran it as kind of like a campaign over the course
mm,
of like the whole Historicon. To me, that's a big game.
yeah.
I don't know the gent's name, but Simon Miller, who you mentioned earlier, he's had a very big and very positive impact on wargaming because somebody put on using his rules a very Simon Miller game at Historicon. Meaning, if you're listening to this, Google, Historicon 2024, and you'll see it. It was this massive Ancients game. And again, like where when you're pushing that lead across the table, you're pushing miniatures. So that was great. Now, I also have some friends who I would say are kind of like in the old guard, people that were adults when I was a little kid. So these are
Yeah.
guys that are kind of anywhere like in their 60s, 70s. A couple of guys are more like just a little older than me. I'm 43. So, a few people that are a little older than me, but they put on a great 55 days at Peking game. And there's really nothing like that. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to play a war game set in that. And for those of you that are listening, it was basically the siege of Peking, like modern day Beijing during the Boxer Rebellion. Now, what's interesting about that whole period is I think it is one of the most disproportionate war games you can play in the sense that the boxers were like a mob. They're never going to win anything, but there's just something so gorgeous. Like we were talking about colors and paint schemes, something so gorgeous about all of the European legations and European nations. There's so many modeling opportunities. And a very good friend of mine, John Manning, who he's won so many awards at Historicons for his games. Him and John Speece, who I mentioned earlier, they put on this game and they literally have all the legations.
Oh,
So you're
wow.
literally playing in the city of Peking, and all the boxers are running through the streets, like creating terror. And you're trying to survive in your legation. That to me is a big game, you know.
Yeah.
Um, Also, and I don't know if anybody plays this in the UK. And truthfully, it's not my favorite game, but there's a game called Classical Hack. It's an ancient war game.
Okay.
I would argue, like, it's one of those games I don't think many people play it,
Yeah.
but it was always a staple at Historicon and Cold Wars. The guy's name, I'm going to butcher it, I think. His name is Phil Viverito. I believe that's his name. Truthfully though, I don't know if he's still alive. And by the way, if you're listening, Phil, I apologize. But it's just like I haven't seen him in a long time, but I know that there are still people that run these games and they are gorgeous. All 28 millimeter ancients, beautiful topographic table where they kind of go with the method of building the table up with pink insulation and then like laying out the battle cloth on top of it to really make nooks and crannies and everything. It's one of those games where armies start very close together. So it's not really a game where you have to make a ton of decisions. It's more like a spectacle, if that makes sense. But still, like I definitely put that into the idea of big games. Now, my last observation, I've definitely noticed, I don't know if this is something happening in the UK or not, but a lot of people are starting to gravitate towards 54 millimeter wargaming.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen that, but in the States,
Yeah.
it's like the epitome of big gaming, like classic, in a lot of ways. And there are a number of people that are doing that here in the States. I think I might butcher this name, but if you go on Instagram, Armchair Emperor
Yes, I've heard of them. Yeah.
is the person's handle. And he puts on absolutely awesome games at like Historicon particularly. And there's also another gentleman whose name at the moment is escaping me, but he has run the last couple of years really innovative where you're playing 54 millimeter games, but because the figures are so big, like you need a table that's so wide that like it's almost impossible to play. So what he does is he makes rows of 6x5 tables. So when you are advancing, you leave one table and go to the next one, which is absolutely brilliant. And there's like all kinds of like rules, mechanics, and things to sort of go with that, to make it make sense.
Was that the guy who did an ACW at
Yes,
Historica?
yes.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, his name is escaping me at the
Yeah,
moment.
I can't remember it either.
Yeah, but he did an ACW game, and the year before, he did a Sudan game, if my memory serves right, the Siege of Khartoum. And he has a pretty his actually I do remember his tag is Der Alte Fritz. And if you
Yes,
go,
yeah,
if you go on Google and Google his name, you'll find his blog, and he's old school in the sense that he kind of, well, even you do this too, right? Like he has a blog, I guess, that he started, years ago,
yeah,
and
10,
he kind of keeps
15
up
years
with it.
ago.
Yeah, he keeps up with it, and it's just like he does really, really, really awesome stuff. Really, really awesome stuff.
Yeah, I saw that at one of the reviews of the last historic on that particular table. Absolutely amazing, and the separate table things kind of harks back to the War Games Holiday Centre in the UK, which was kind of the 1970s when it started, and that difficulty that you have of that a human being can only reach so
Yeah,
far, and there's very few volunteers to be winched over the top of the table in like a circus trapeze act
yeah,
to get to the middle to move your figures.
yeah. No,
So
it can be really tough.
it's a good way. It's a good way of sort of challenging that problem
Yeah,
within a big game.
there's also a couple of other people too. Because again, like I am a fixture at these cons, but at the same time, like, I'm kind of like a wandering nomad. Like, there's no one particular group that I'm with all the time. So unfortunately, like, I'm finding myself that I'm doing it now. Like, I'm butchering names and not remembering names. It's really just like remembering things that I see. So again, like, if we're still thinking about like the idea of the big game, do you know Howard Whitehouse? Have you ever heard that name before?
That name rings a bell.
Howard Whitehouse is one of these guys who he's written a whole bunch of different sets of rules over the years, but like he is really well known in the United States for putting on the big game and like really quirky with lots of events happening. Really like one of those almost like blending the idea of RPG with a miniatures game, but they're big games, like a lot of figures on the table. And the last person, and again, like his name is escaping me, but
Mm.
if you go on Instagram, I don't have my phone with me, but if you go on Instagram, he I know that he's connected to Corey Ring with Cigar Box Battles,
Yeah.
who makes gaming mats. He is really into acting. And
Okay.
every year he kind of puts on these really theatrical big games. I would phrase it as a big game in terms of terrain, not miniatures. It's more skirmishy, like in terms of what you command, but the gaming tables are huge, like cities, like immersive experiences. It's just his name is escaping me. In other words, like if you think about all the games that I just mentioned, I do think the idea of the big game is pretty healthy in the
Mm.
United States. And I don't know, man. Like even growing up as a kid, I don't know if I would argue that it's better or worse now. I think the big game has always been a spectacle. But what I will say though is you definitely see nowadays in the United States way less what I would call mom and pop ACW games or mom and pop Napoleonic games where you're playing like house rules that somebody made and it is a really big game and it is on a really big table pushing a lot of miniatures around. I don't see as many of those anymore, you know.
Yeah.
That's my
Is
answer.
is there still because when I think about gaming in the States, although there's not necessarily the club scene, there is quite a big scene where you've got 4 or 5 people in an area and somebody's got a big basement and that's kind of their gaming space. And quite often, unless you're in a major city, house sizes are quite big and you tend to have cellars, etc. And that's kind of another area of the big game that's not quite as big in the UK.
I would argue that happens a lot. And I would say
Yeah.
like that's mostly how people war game, right? Because again, like and again, it's going to sound like I'm shitting all over historical wargaming, but like,
Mm.
look, most people that don't game historicals, I'm sure they have board game nights at their house, or I'm sure they have like a Warhammer night, you know. But those folks, in a lot of cases, have much more of a broad community. Where, for example, where I live, where my house is, there is a absolutely lovely gaming shop called the Tabletop Gaming Center, and that's in
Mm.
Newington, Connecticut. You get a huge amount of people there, but it's not to do historicals. You know, like there are people that are meeting up with people to play Warhammer, hundreds of people going to play Magic the Gathering and role playing games and things along those lines, right? But I would say for historical wargaming, the model has always been the basement,
Yeah.
where, yeah, you're right. Like, you've got 4 or 5 guys in a particular area and maybe there's that house that you meet at. And like for me, like my basement could be that, but you have to remember I'm way younger than a lot of the
Yeah.
people that game. So you know it's not to say that like I don't invite them over, but I find that they are a little bit more tight knit than I am with them, if
Yes.
that makes sense, even though I kind of grew up with them. But like one of my best gaming buddies and like really just like a good friend of mine, his name is John Manning. And I mentioned him earlier. I grew up really like when I was first started teaching, so like in my 20s and my 30s, I would game at his place, fairly regularly. But what I mean by regularly is maybe 4 or 5 times a year. But I would say for other people, like it's, like they'll game a lot more. They'll play once a week, and I do think that big games happen in those spaces. It's just that no one sees them
Yeah,
except for the people
yeah.
gaming.
And those, like you say, those groups tend to be relatively insular in the fact that you are going into somebody's house. So I haven't done for a while. In fact, since COVID, I've not run a game here. But my friends come to my house, but I'm not necessarily going to invite somebody who I meet at a show to come to my house.
Exactly.
So
And it's a problem though, a
yeah, I
very
mean,
big problem.
yeah, I've watched documentaries on serial killers. So I don't want them coming into my
No,
house.
totally. But this is a problem though, right? And
Yeah.
again, this is I would argue it's a unique problem
Mm,
to historical wargamers because you're
mm,
right. Like you go to the con with your crew, and yes, you'll see people every year that but they might live a really far distance from you, right? So it's almost like these little tiny insular groups that are with each other, and they are interacting with other people, but not really. It's
yeah.
not the same thing as like my board gaming group where we have dinner once a week and we're friends and we game, or the experience that many of you guys will talk about, like being in the UK, where it's like, you've got your quote unquote mates that you see once a week and you have your beer at the end of the game, in the pub, downstairs from where you play. I'm very envious of that, if I'm really being honest with you. Like that, I have that with my board gamers and like my role players, but I've never. And this is, and if, for those that are listening, like if you've ever gamed with me, that like in all
Mm,
seriousness, like this is not meant to be insulting, but like I've never really had that. I've always been the young guy, where even though I'm pretty well regarded in the gaming world, like I'm still the young guy, not necessarily subservient to my elders, but like they kind of run the show. I'm probably not being fair, but you have to understand, Ken, like the reason that I'm jealous of you guys is because I always floated from group to group. Like I never had that person that lived down the street from me where we war gamed once a week. That never has been part of my life.
no, interesting perspective for sure. So we nice little chat there on big games. So we're now going to move on to something I haven't done for a while on the show. It's the features section. Right, here we go again. So the usual disclaimer: if you're going to get upset at any of the answers to this quiz or any of the questions, you are probably listening to the wrong show. Because this is where I allow my guests to have whatever opinions they like. And the first part is, of course, the infamous Yorkshire Gamer quiz. 20 questions, which kind of say how Yorkshire Gamer you are. It's not how good you are, how bad you are. It's how Yorkshire Gamer you are.
And these
So
are yes or no's.
they're mostly yes or no's or one or another. And if you want to have a discussion about any of the questions, more than happy to do so. Question 1 of 20. Nice, easy one to start. Go big or go home?
I would say if it's at a con, go big. When I go to a
Go big.
con, it's
Yeah,
basically a yes.
yeah,
It's go big.
yeah. That's what the podcast is all about.
Yeah. Am I giving you too much background? Because
Whatever you want, mate.
oh,
Whatever you
great.
want.
No, because
We've
like,
we,
look.
we've had we in this we've had discussions for like half an hour on best fish and chip shop in Skipton, which is one of the local towns to
Oh,
me.
that's cool.
So I wouldn't worry about
All right. Well,
going
look.
off the mark.
All right. So I'm gonna be at my most volatile now. Are you ready?
Okay. Yeah.
Look. Don't get me wrong. If you're just getting into the hobby and you're super excited, I'm not saying this to dissuade you, but look, if I go to a fucking convention and some dude has brought their tablecloth from home and have like 10 miniatures on a side and everything looks terrible, I'm sorry, but like there's no reason to do that anymore. So it's like the idea of going big. I'm going to put on the best possible game. And if I'm going to play something, I want to play the best possible game. So to me, what go big means is I want to see a goddamn table with miniatures on it. I want to see them painted. I want to see them look good. And ultimately, I want to have somebody that's competent that's going to run the game.
Yeah, they're kind of minimums for me as well. And I always kind of say that I'm paying to come into these conventions or shows, so I'm paying to see the best. I
Yeah,
can go.
totally.
I'm going. I can go to my club on a Wednesday night and see people playing games. Whatever they look like, it doesn't really matter. They're enjoying the games. Whereas at a show, if I'm putting a demonstration game on or a participation game, it should look the best, without a shadow of a doubt.
I'm
Anyway,
with you.
that's pissed a few people off, but there we go. Question 2: contrast paints, are they great or are they a gimmick?
Gut instinct. I've used them. I find them to be a bit gimmicky. I think it's just a new kind of way for these companies to make money. I feel like I know how to use them,
Yeah,
but I always find that look here. Why don't I phrase it this way? The idea of just using that and that's it. You're not highlighting. You're not doing anything else, right? That to me is just lazy, and it doesn't look that good. The only time I have used them on some figures, but I always end up highlighting anyway. I do like washes though. I do like washes, but that's separate to me than like this all-in-one kind of gimmicky bottle with stuff in it. In other words, I can still paint just as well without using them.
yeah. I think well, regular listeners to the show will know my thoughts on them. But it really is sold as this: you slap it on and that's it, it's done. But most people I speak to will go, well, actually, what I do is I do a different coloured undercoat, and then I put it on, and then I do like a highlight, and I might do a little bit dry. So it's like you're not saving any time at all there. What you're doing is a traditional paint method, but with
Well,
thin paints.
well, here's the thing. I'll piss people off, right? Ready?
Yeah,
When I talk to people that paint that way, I mean, if you're an expert painter and that's what you're going for, like you want somebody to be like, oh my God, that's gorgeous. Honestly, for the vast majority of us, nobody's going to fucking notice. Nobody's going to notice how many different paints you used, how many layers you used. Nobody gives a shit. They want to play a game. That's what people want. Now, if you, right, because I've met people like this, like if your ego comes from how nice your figures are and it's just for you, do you. But like most people aren't going to care. So to me it's like save your time and like make something look good, but you really should be focused on your game. That's my take.
yeah, yeah. I think we go back there to the Venn diagram of wargaming. If your biggest circle is painter, and you've got tiny overlaps for the others, then kind of that's where you're going to go.
Yeah. But put your figures on the table.
Exactly.
I'm sorry, put your figures on the table.
Right. So, question 3. Not sure whether this will translate too well to America, but because this is about paintbrushes. And would you go for Windsor and Newton, who are very posh, or Pro Art, who are made in Yorkshire?
So in other words, like cheap brush versus the really nice brush.
No, no. Pro Art are a very good quality brush. They're just made in Yorkshire.
I don't know. I kind of just don't care really. I mean, look, paintbrushing wise, they all get frayed anyway. Like I mean, again, but like that like painting is not my it's not my forte. So I don't know. I have too many other things to do. Like I just don't like put that much effort into paintbrushes. I mean, is really what it comes down to. But then again, like you said, the second one was made in Yorkshire. Well, then I feel like you have to go with that, right?
Oh, good lad, good lad.
Right, that's a good answer, right?
Yeah, there is I forgot to mention the absolutely massive regional bias in this particular quiz. Question 4. 96 figures. Is that an army or a unit of pike?
I have to go with Army. I'm sorry. 96 25 millimeter figures in a unit. You must be out of your mind. Well, I mean, I guess
Small.
that's big.
Yeah.
To you, is that small?
That's yeah. I had Martin Kelly on, who does big games at Historicon. He's got some 144 figure pike blocks in the game he's doing.
Yeah, that's a lot of time, man. That is, I mean, all the power to you. But to me, like, I don't know, man. And again, like, I have a lot of figures. Maybe 15s. That's a little different, but that's a lot of figures, dude. Maybe in other words, like, if I don't have to paint them, All the power to you. That's
Yeah.
great. Let me push them around, but like that's a lot of figures.
You'd like to look at them, but not necessarily produce them.
Absolutely.
Which is fair enough. 6x4 table, is that a big game or a small game?
Small game.
Oh, excellent.
Do you like how fast that was?
I like that. I like that one. There's people. In fact, that was the one thing that upset somebody the most. They went absolutely mental on Twitter about that.
Well, that's just what people do, though. You can't read comments. You can't
No.
do any of that.
You know, I've had a career where most people have shouted at me and sworn at me for various things.
You know what's funny though? But like, I don't get that vibe from you. Like, I've also heard that. Like, but like I don't know. Like, you haven't said anything crazy today. Like,
there are just people out there who who want to have a go for the sake of having a go. There was a guy on Facebook who was having a go against. Have you seen the shell splashes I do for my naval stuff?
yes, I have.
Yeah, he was calling them trees and being. It's like,
how about this?
Weird.
Get a life.
Yeah, exactly.
Right,
Well,
get a fucking life.
It kind of ended up that I posted some more pictures and he put, "Oh, trees again." To which I replied, "Who put 50p in the dickhead?"
Well, also just, I mean, I just don't understand that whole mentality. Like, who has the time to be able to sit down, frankly, to like comment on anything? Like the idea of just sitting down and I see something that like either I like or don't like, and I'm going to sit there for 5 minutes and making a comment about it. It's like, get a life.
Yeah. No, it was funny. It was very funny. Anyway, where are we? Question 6. Would you go for a points-based army or an historical order of battle?
Historical order of battle.
Oh, good man. That's what we like to see.
Yeah, enough said. I don't think I need to go into that one.
Yeah, we don't need to go into that one at all.
But should we, though? You want to hear a really funny story?
Sure.
I will never forget this. And this is going to connect later on to like why sometimes people in this community drive me crazy. I will never forget. Going into a gaming store to this town that I moved to. And I went to this gaming store and I was in the Battlefront section for Flames of War. And again, it was like this pitiful attempt on my part to be like, I should really find some people to game with. And I'm trying to be optimistic and upbeat, And I go in there and some kid like comes up to me and he starts lecturing me about like Soviet tanks and starts spitting points at me. And I was very polite and never went back. I just don't tell a history teacher, a person who's been wargaming for a really long time, how many fucking points a T-34 is and why I should take a T-34 versus a T-26. Like, it's, I don't know. Those kinds of people just, I don't know. They just rub me the wrong way, Yeah, it's just silly. It's also like, just don't be lazy. Like, again, don't get me wrong. I understand why there are some games out there that need a point system. I'm not saying, like, I understand how games are made. It's like, I get it. But when it comes to what we do, read a fucking book. Open up a book and it'll tell you what was at the battle, right? And usually a nicely set of rules will give you those stats.
Right,
That's
exactly.
part of the fun, right? Is like trying to figure out how to make all this stuff work. Like, point system for historical wargaming is tough. It's really tough to do. Even if you were supportive of it, it's tough, because ultimately,
and then you find people who game the points, don't you? They look for this list building thing to try and maximize the points, and
which again, if I'm being fair, like, I understand why some people do that, but at the same time, if you're really, that to me is like a tournament model. Tournament models don't have any place in a big participation game. Maybe that's the best way to put it.
Yeah, no, that'll do me. Question 7. When you're mixing your paints, do you use a wet palette or an old bit of MDF?
Usually the old MDF, though I'm not opposed to the wet palette. I'm not opposed to it. We can maybe disagree on this. I'm not opposed to it. Truthfully, I've never tried it. A lot of people are about it. So I want to be careful. I don't want to shit on something I've never used before, but I'm just old school. Like I'm actually looking at it, like my little my little $1,
Yeah.
paint palette thing from Michaels, and that's usually where I do I love mixing paint too. Well, you don't like wet palettes? You think they're a gimmick?
Oh, they drive
They're
me
bullshit.
nuts. They just you forget about them, and then you go back to them 2 weeks later, and you've invented the cure for COVID because you've got all this fucking mold
Bacteria.
lying around everywhere, and it's just no. You see, what everyone says to me is they make your paint last longer.
Right.
So I always say, well, why don't you put less paint onto your MDF and then
Wait, so you'll take like an MDF base and put the paint on that?
yeah, it's just I've got like an old round base that I just put a little dip of paint on it, and then I'll
Right.
work with that. And then if I need more, I'll put a little bit more on. And
Yeah. So look, here's the one thing I will say, right? So I've had Dave Taylor on my show before. Dave Taylor from GW fame. He's a big fan of the wet palette. He's a ridiculous painter. So I'm not going to shit on it until I try it. Because again, like there are plenty of people that I know that use them and use them well. So, but then again, I don't know. Maybe it's somebody just trying to make a buck on us
yeah,
old veteran
yeah.
war gamers, So
Do I really need 96 different shades of color on 96 figures in a pipe block?
but that's exactly my point though, right? Like I think some companies where they, come out with these systems where here buy these 10 different grays. It's like there is this thing called mixing a little white in. You don't really need to do that,
Yeah,
right?
it's very true. Very true. Where are we? Number 8. Undercoating figures. Do you go for a black undercoat or a white undercoat?
99% of the time black. Mostly for the purpose of like leaving some shadows and things along those lines. I used to prime in white a very long time ago, and there is something cool about it, but I don't know. I just find it ends up being a lot more work. Unless, of course, you're going to prime white and then maybe do a little bit of a wash first and then kind of get in there. But I don't feel particularly vehement on this one. Like, if I could only prime figures white from this moment forever, I would be okay with it.
Yeah, it would destroy my painting style completely.
Do you prime in black?
Black, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I don't know. I've gone with black forever.
Yeah, it's the way forward. It's the way forward. Yeah. Question 9, and this could separate us through the continents.
All right, well, we'll see.
Yeah. Do you, if you want a hot drink, would you go for Yorkshire tea or dirty mucky coffee?
I don't drink anything warm. So it's going to be a
not?
fucked up answer. No, I don't. So I don't look. Actually, that's not true. If for some reason, when I go to Europe, I do like, as I'm traveling, a hot coffee, or a cappuccino or something along those lines. I do not like the sensation of like burning my mouth. Like, I don't like hot coffee. I don't like hot tea. I only drink hot tea if I'm sick. So everything I drink is basically ice. But I'm also a weird freak, though. So, for example, you tell me what you think of this. So it's like, I love soup, absolutely love soup, right? But if it's not in a bowl with a spoon, like if somebody put it in a mug and said, drink this, I won't do it. I will not do it.
Have you, I don't know whether you have this in America, but have you got cup of soup?
Yes.
It's just like a sachet of powder.
I won't drink
it
out of it. I'll have it. I'll like use a spoon or like a fork or whatever to eat it, but I won't drink it. I don't know why.
No.
So that's like a non-answer. What would your answer be to that question?
Tea, Yorkshire tea all day, every day.
Do you drink coffee?
Very rarely.
Yeah.
Very rarely. When I met my wife, she couldn't believe how the kettle never went cold. So, I would say I have between 15 and 20 cups of tea a day.
You may as well have a pith helmet on right now, like the way you said. That is the most British thing I've ever heard.
Tea, cricket, or the whole British thing.
Ah, Jesus.
Yeah, I'm totally for it. That's the one good thing the Empire did bring was.
But
tea.
Nobody really drink like it's probably us that brought coffee to you to some extent, right? Meaning like Starbucks and things like that. I don't know. Like
when I go on holiday to Italy, I will drink coffee because Italians they can do coffee.
They
What they
can,
can't,
yeah.
what they can't do is tea. A little bit like America. I've been to America a few times, and I do like the place, but fuck me, the tea. It's just
We don't
Jesus.
drink it. We throw it out into the water, you know? Like we don't
Yeah,
it's not our
exactly.
thing.
It's either that or it comes cold and with lemon in it.
See,
And
I
it's like,
love iced tea. I enjoy
oh,
iced tea. I enjoy that. But
oh.
yeah, I can see that. That's like it must be just anathema to you people. You come here and like we see like British people immolating on the street, you know, watching that shit.
Yeah, well, my lad did did the tutor thing at Camp America last year, or was it
Oh
the year
shit,
before?
really? That's cool.
Yeah, just north of New York, and we actually flew some Yorkshire tea into him because he was just couldn't
If you don't
find
mind me
anything to drink.
asking,
Yeah.
where north of New York?
Oh, I would
Do you
have
remember
to.
what town?
I would have to look. Was it
Oh, that's
Westminster? Westminster?
not Westchester.
Could be. I can't remember. I
Yeah,
can't
we'll have to
remember.
connect offline. Yeah, I just
Yeah.
wonder because I'm very familiar with that group.
Yeah, yeah.
So
No, he did a year out there. Really enjoyed it. Really,
no, that's
really
cool.
enjoyed it. Bit of a non-answer there, but never mind. So question 10. War games units. Do you like them tightly packed, the figures, or socially distanced?
Tightly packed.
Get
Also, it
them in.
depends on the game too, right? Like
Oh
to
yeah,
me,
sure.
linear games you need to be packed and tight. And
Mm.
again, like if I'm not painting them, even though that's not true, like my 15 millimeter armies are gigantic. I think 25s just scare me, to be honest. Like I think they're just terrifying. The idea that like I'll need to paint 1,025s for like a linear game, but I like my bases together. In fact, a lot of my armies nowadays, not 25s, but smaller figures, I'm actually starting to put them on diorama sized bases to make them look really good and then just use like counters like to, track casualties and stuff.
Yeah, I much prefer that style of basing.
Yeah.
I think it looks so much better. I again annoying people now, but I really hate Sabo bases. I don't know. It's like an automatic reaction. We talked about this on the Christmas show. The what the fuck's that? And you kind of that automatic reaction. Oh, what the fuck's that? And then I kind of calm down and go, well, maybe
Which
people like
bases
to
are
go.
those?
They're where you have individual figures on individual bases, usually on a 25, 50 mil base, and then you put them individually slot
Ridiculous.
into a bigger base with
Absolutely
holes in. Yeah,
ridiculous. Just
it's like,
you don't need.
yeah,
I know exactly what that's ridiculous. Now again,
yeah,
why? I imagine it's because there are people that use those for like skirmish games or whatever, but
yeah.
it looks terrible.
Yeah, it's coming
Awful.
from. Yeah, I think it comes from like the Games Workshop Lord of the Rings style game where the figure. No,
Yeah, I'm not good. Not good on that
no,
one.
I try to be nice, but then the
Apparently we're
slap
not
comes off.
nice. I feel like I'm worse than you are though. I'm usually on my own show like much more calm, I feel like.
Yeah, yeah. No,
So who knows? Maybe I'll get more shit than you for this episode.
this section of the show is all about whatever you want to say. It always has been. We're doing all right so far. We're on 80%, halfway through. So question 11. Would you prefer a 2-hour club game or a weekend monster game?
Weekend Monster. For wargaming, Weekend Monster.
Yes. Yeah. Excellent.
Because you don't have enough time in an evening to play a big game. That's my rationale. Like I would rather board game during the week and play a war game once a month on a weekend.
Question 12. Avocados. Now, I'm not sure. Are you aware of the British love of mushy peas?
Yes, they're very good.
Ah, right. So the question is, avocado, are they just posh mushy peas?
No. They're totally different. No, who would say that?
Do you like avocados then?
Yeah, I do. They're also really good for
Oh,
you. They're very good for you.
are they? I
Yeah,
thought,
they are. No, but I'm really confused. This is a very confusing question to me.
yeah.
Are there
So,
people that would argue they're the same thing?
no, what I'm saying is that they're posh mushy peas. So in the south of England, people will like eat posh foods because they're posh.
Right.
That they'll have kumquats, and I can't remember the little. There's load quinoa and all these weird things that it would. The north of England is kind of meat, potatoes, vegetables.
All right, I'm following you now. Yeah, I get
yeah.
that. That's a very English thing. I mean, but I
Yeah.
guess, is that a thing in the United States? No, I don't think so, because I don't know, like, politically we're very different, from like East Coast to West Coast. Like, we're very regional in that sense, but we're so socioeconomically different in the same places that one didn't translate to me. I think that's ridiculous. Avocado, yeah, I like both of those things, and I'm going to eat both of those things for different reasons.
Yeah, we in the north of England, avocado shows that you're trying to have a status or class above.
Good God,
what
you guys
actually are.
need more problems. You should come and live here for a year. Like, if that is your biggest problem, like if people have issues with like a particular food representing something, that sounds more like Northern Italy versus Southern Italy.
Yeah.
Where, what I mean? Like, I don't know if we have that here, to be honest. Ultimately, I like both.
Fish chips and mushy peas.
Yeah, I love mushy peas.
Smashed avocado on toast.
Okay, well, hold on one second. Avocado toast is bullshit. That I understand what you mean. Like, that it's like,
he's coming on board now. He's coming on board.
Yeah, no. Like, the idea of putting avocado on toast is just a waste of money. If you're talking about splitting open a delicious avocado and putting some lemon and some salt and pepper on it and having with your eggs, that's one thing. But like the idea of avocado toast, that is kind of an absurd thing to me. I would never order that. And frankly, no one I know would ever order that. I don't think. Except like vegetarians, like who can't get something else for breakfast,
Yeah.
That's how I feel about that.
I can see where we're going. Right. So, question 13. Now, this one has been answered universally the same by every single guest so far.
All right.
So no pressure.
Yeah, no pressure on me.
So this is round dice, spherical dice. Are they allowed or banned on your table?
Ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. It shouldn't, like, round dice should not exist except for the cool D100. I've seen the D100 that looks like a ball. That's cool, but no, that's ridiculous.
Good lad.
Yeah.
Good lad. I didn't want to lose that question. Question 14. Wargaming measurements. Would you prefer glorious imperial inches or what we call French money, some centimeters?
Inches.
Yeah,
Americans just don't get the metric system, and the Americans that do claim to get it are just usually assholes that just think they're just like pretentious people. So no, it's got to be inches. I'm not gonna lie though, this might upset you. I'm starting to lean into gridded games. They just that sounded like a little bit of a diminishing right? Look, here's the thing though, right? I find that the vast majority of arguments in games that slow everything down are people complaining about, well, did you move the full? Was that 12 inches? So I'm starting to lean a little bit more towards the grid, which is, again, like that will get people fighting.
Oh God, yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. I'm just not convinced yet. I'll try it, but I'm not convinced yet.
Well, isn't your best buddy Simon Miller, or do you just know each other like tangentially?
I just, I'll point him in the right direction eventually. He'll learn. So right, we've done that one. Talking about a set of rules now. Do you like a good table in a set of rules, like a casualty table or an armor penetration table, or do you prefer more of a diced orientated results?
It's a very good question. That's a very, very, very good question. I'll answer it this way.
Yeah.
I do like a really good chart, just not too many of them.
Yeah.
I don't like 1,000 tables. Get it all on something, or just try to minimize the amount of dice rolls you need to make and minimize the amount of charts that one needs. And if those conditions are met, I'm cool with the chart.
Excellent. I think they're a really good way of summarizing stuff.
Yeah, it's tricky though. It's an art form.
Yeah, well, for sure. And I think gone are the days of, I don't know if you've heard or seen of a rule set called Sea Krieg.
Oh my god. Yeah, don't. That's a rough game. That's like where you're
Yeah,
counting fucking rivets. Like, I'm sorry. Like, I do like naval games though, and I know that you do as well. Like, there's a couple that I really like, but Sea Krieg I've played a couple times. For the people that love it, I feel like they love it. You know, I don't know how much middle ground there is with that game. I have a friend that loves that fucking game.
yeah. I think it's if you're into really, really detailed stuff, then it's the game for you.
Or if you're an engineer,
Yeah, like me.
every engineer that I know loves that game.
Yes, our minds do work in different ways, I have to say. Question 16. 28 mil is king, yes or no?
I need a second for that one. If I'm not painting them, yes,
Yeah, yeah.
that's my answer.
Good lad, good lad. And question 17. Unpainted miniatures, are they allowed on the table, yes or no?
Abso-fucking-lutely not. You keep your unpainted miniatures at home. That as actually to me, like that's the cardinal sin. Like you do not put you do not put a just a primed figure on the table. I guess if you're home or something, that's one thing, you know. But that's just embarrassing. You don't show up in public with unpainted lead on the table. It's just a cardinal rule. Like I feel like it's almost a non-question.
Well, you got it right though. That's the main thing. Now, this one will blow your mind because it's about English football or
Oh,
soccer, as you
God,
call it.
Jesus. Okay.
This is the Bradford City, who I support, or Leeds United.
This is an impossible question for me to answer. How am I supposed to answer this there, Kat? I mean, look, this is what I'll say. How
Yeah,
about this? Knowing I mean I love football, right? I do enjoy watching it, but I don't know enough about the internal politics of how you folks support teams. This is what I'll say. I would always say go with your local team versus the big baddie, right? So it's almost like in the United States, like it seems almost more admirable if you're a Met fan. They're always looked at as the smaller team versus like the
yeah,
Yankees. That's
yeah,
how I would answer that, even though I
mm,
don't know anything about these two teams.
yeah. Well, I actually went to Shea Stadium back in the day
Oh, did you?
to watch the Mets play the Montreal Expos.
Did they lose?
The Mets lost, yes.
Probably, yeah.
It was quite funny actually, but there
Yeah.
we go. Question 19. Now this is an obvious one, and this is Yorkshire or what we call the place over the hill, which is the
What's the
other
place
side,
over the hill?
the other side in the Wars of the Roses.
Oh, I mean, I feel like, I have to answer it Yorkshire, right? I mean, isn't
Yeah,
it like,
exactly. It
right?
goes without saying.
Exactly. End of story.
I've had a couple of people on from Lancashire. They've only ever been on once. Then we get rid
Right.
of them.
I do have a pretty sizable War of the Roses collection, but I'm not going to lie. You English, right? I mean,
Mm.
just the amount of goddamn people that are in charge 1 minute and dead the next, it gets
Oh,
really difficult. And also, all your goddamn, what is it, liveries and like
yeah,
symbols and trying to match it up to the right person, it makes things very difficult.
exactly. And what makes it even more confusing is that the Yorkist and Lancastrian side was about family rather than location. So the Clifford, who was a big Lancastrian, his main base is Skipton, which is in Yorkshire. So it's all very
It gets
confusing.
very
There we go.
confusing.
Very confusing.
Yes.
Now, question 20, final question, and this one might be a little bit of an interesting one. Games Workshop, are they the work of the devil?
I have somewhat of a love-hate with them, but
Yeah.
I would probably put them more in the devil category, to be
Okay.
honest. But here's the thing, like it's just that no one ever really likes a winner. Like let's
Yeah.
just be honest, right? No one ever likes a winner. Of
Mm.
all the miniatures companies, right? You can't argue with how innovative they've been. You can't argue with the model that they've built. Like, they've built a genius model, right? I just wish their games were better. Like, they're not good games. Like, now backing up, they always made really good side games. So Gorka Morka, Blood Bowl, Mordheim, all of those games, I think, stand the test of time, and they're really fun. War Master as well. But I think they're bread and butter games. I think that even if they wrote the perfect set of rules, they've got to come out with a new one 2 years later. So
Yeah.
it's just a flawed model, like, in general, for a gamer. But, like, for them as a company, they're fucking geniuses. Like,
For a business,
they're
yeah.
like drug dealers. Like, listening to people talk about that game, it makes me want to run and find, like, a AA spot, like, or try to get them to find an AA spot, because it's literally an addiction, and it's purposeful. Like, they design it that way.
GWA, Games Workshop Anonymous.
Yeah, totally. I think, like, they're more expensive now than they ever have been.
Yeah,
It's
frighteningly
unbelievably expensive. But again, like, they've got their target audience. And honestly, I don't even think they care if you stay with them. They have, like, that, like 10 to 15 or 10 to 16, right? Nail them a couple of times, and then you'll get the next batch. And that's really where they make their money.
And then people come back, don't they, in later life and
Yeah.
kind of play the version that they played.
Absolutely. And Games Workshop doesn't give a shit about that person. They just that one demographic, or age bracket.
Interesting, very interesting company. Very interesting company. Well, you'll be very glad to know that you scored 80%.
Oh, really?
Which is quite
excellent.
good.
Excellent. I try a B-. Yeah, that's me.
Yeah. Which, I mean, some people don't want to be Yorkshire gamer at all. So 80% is quite good.
Excellent.
So we'll move on in the features section then to Room 101, which is George Orwell's Room of Horror. It was turned into a TV show here in the UK, and the guests on the show would try and convince their host to put a pet hate of theirs in Room 101 so that it could be banished forever. So this is your chance, Jared, to pick a topic and really give some hatred towards it.
Well, this is a very dangerous part of the show, because again, like, I do have strong opinions about some of these things when it comes to wargaming. Well, I'm pausing because I feel like I'm going to make people very mad, so let's just sort of go with it, right? All right, so how about we frame this part like this? I have met some of, like, the nicest, kindest, most awesome wargamers in my time, right? These are people that I would game with. These are people who put on good games, that are pillars of the community, that are, like, helpful, yada yada yada. However, they're also the old grognards, right? Like, and I don't know if you ever refer to folks like that in the UK, but that's kind of the name for them here in the States. So my sort of pet peeve, or my pet hate, it would be, I'll frame it as a question, right? For those people that have been gaming for so long and have literally done nothing for our hobby, in fact, all they've done is made things harder for you and me and the Little Wars TV guys and Mark Festoso from Mark's Wargaming Room. Like, why we have to work extra hard because of people who can sometimes be the most uninviting people in the history of people, right? So just eccentrics, people who will argue about the color of a wall, people who go on the miniatures page and argue about what hue of blue French uniforms really were. And not only that, but they'll do it at conventions with new people at the table and make us all look like assholes. That's my pet peeve, is, like, what I want to do is shake these people, because honestly, they'll complain about how the hobby's dying. And what they don't understand is you are part of that. You are part of the reason why people will sometimes go to a wargaming show and fucking leave, because of the GMs that don't like kids at their games, the GMs who don't know what they're doing and run a terrible game, or the worst, the asshole player who it seems like what their goal is to show up at a con and bitch and moan and complain about everything. And I can say that you could probably tell I have plenty of outlets to do gaming, and it's like I have run games enough times where you get that asshole at the table, and for me, who has a lot going on, it's like I don't need this kind of
Yeah.
stress. And again, like I don't even think it's people who do it on purpose. There's just a lot of eccentric people where I don't know if they don't have any friends or they don't have a relationship, but like they take their aggression out on GMs and other players. That drives me to the point of not wanting to go to historical wargaming conventions.
Yeah,
Was that venomous
it's
enough?
no, I have had that experience a few times, and I don't get the motivation behind it. Sometimes people like to be right. I kind of get that, but around a war games table, I will often find that the games that we play, we're all laughing and joking, and we had one classic argument that I've mentioned many times before because we very rarely argue around the table, but we argued for about half an hour over a particular rule, which is not like us. But then we found out that I was having one version of the rule book and my friend had the deluxe version. So
Yeah.
we were both actually right.
Classic. Yeah, no, that's classic. But that also, yeah, I mean that can happen, and I've seen that
Yeah.
happen too.
Mm.
But yeah, just some people, man. But I guess it's like any other hobby, right? There's always going to be somebody who, like, for whatever reason, just struggles or for whatever reason wants to make people's time not so good. But the difference between an asshole golfer and an asshole wargamer is people are still going to play golf, right?
Yeah.
For us, we're constantly thinking about how to get more attention to what we do. And sometimes you have literally the worst ambassadors, right? Unhealthy, fat, out of shape, politically shitty. And I don't even mean right or left. I mean just people who have shitty opinions. And again, like these are people where you almost like hope that you don't see them show up somewhere and they just do and they just make everything difficult. It's
Yeah.
you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And again, I know how that sounds. I do. And I'm not intending on insulting like an entire group of people, but just to be clear, I'm not saying it's everybody. There's some of the nicest, most um easy to deal with, like fun-loving people as well that I've interacted with, but it's just like teaching. You never remember them. You always remember that shitty parent that made your life miserable for the course of the school year. But those people have a lot of power. And it's usually them that we remember.
Mm. And I think to use a military phrase, it's kind of time on target, isn't it? If we have a limited amount of time to convince somebody to come into the hobby, and if that time is taken up by somebody who's a bit of an arsehole, then we have lost that target. They've gone.
Yeah, agreed.
Um, and they'll go and they'll collect stamps or model trains or something else, and we need to be very aware of that.
No, for sure.
I think it's better than it was. Certainly in the UK, we had a thing for a long time where people would put a display game on and they would not talk to the people at the show. And that's very much changed now. And when I put something on, I don't actually play the game. I talk to people while others play the game. So I think it's turning around quite a bit, and we don't have that as much as we used to
Yeah.
do.
That's the biggest difference with UK conventions versus American conventions is like there's really no such thing as like a participation game versus a demo game. Like you sign up for games. But I find that that's almost worse in the sense that like some person has put all this time into a game. They
Mm,
shelve all their stuff, they shelve it and put it in their cars and box everything up and drive 5 hours to run a game. And it's like, can't you just be cool? Like not have to argue every single detail, not have to insult the GM about whether the standard bearer is the right color flag for that regiment. And I'm not exaggerating. Every one of these examples I have seen or been a part of. And again, like, I don't know. I mean, I doubt people are running less games now because of that. Because the thing is that I find that so many people are used to this type of behavior that it doesn't really bother them, that they just deal with it.
Yeah.
For me, I don't. I don't have the personality for that. If you're being an asshole, I'm going to tell you that you are. But I think for a lot of GMs, they're much more patient than I am.
I think the golden rule should be, if you're at a table that somebody clearly spent months and months of their life on, you should say thank you and not
Absolutely.
be an asshole. It's as simple as
Absolutely.
that. Yeah, simple as that. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for that. That was I like a good rant. I love a good rant.
Oh, that's what I'm known for. So I just don't do it on my own show, really.
So we'll move on to Desert Island Wargame, the final part of the features section, and this is a thing called Desert Island Discs. I don't think you'll have it in America, but it's a radio show and it's been going for like 70 or so years. And somebody comes on the radio, somebody famous, and they choose 8 songs that they would like to take to a desert island on, so they could listen to them. But they're also allowed to take a number of other items with them. And that's kind of where this idea comes from. So if you were on a desert island, what would your desert island war game be? What would be the one game that you would like to take?
Sure. So for the war game itself, it would definitely be a rule set that I mentioned a little while ago, or at least, well, not really a little while. This is hours ago. The Sword in the Flame. It's my favorite war game. It's old. It's really old. From the late '70s, early '80s. It's my favorite game. I've always enjoyed playing it. It has great mechanics, great high points, and that would definitely be it. Now whether or not I could bring lots of different forces, that's another story. But I could probably live with just like the Anglo-Afghan War, the second
Yeah.
one, or even Zulus. I just really like that. I like those types of games.
You know what? I'm really pissed off that I've sold it now, because now you're talking so enthusiastic about it. I
I
thought
don't know if
I
you'd
would.
like it, to be honest.
I could just go up there, because it used to sat behind me on that row up there, and I could pull it down and have a look at it. But I've sold it now, so.
You could always get a copy. I mean, a lot of the family members are dead. It's kind of hard to find the rules, but you could probably eBay it.
Yeah,
If you really wanted to.
Yeah, I've got a bit of positive on my account on eBay, so I might be
Nice.
able to. Second one then, Desert Island. What book would you take? A book.
So that's an easy one. That's a really
Yeah.
easy one for me, but not even so much because I would like to read it. It's more just sentimental. So, I used to read this Encyclopedia of Military History, like cover to cover, like weekly. That's literally what the book is called, Encyclopedia of Military History. It's basically from at the time it would be 3500 BC or BCE to the present. So the present at that time was basically like the 60s. I'm gonna butcher the guy's name. I'll just spell it. I think they were brothers. Dupuy, maybe Dupuy or Dupuy. I don't really know how to pronounce it, but that book. I mean, it's like 1,200 pages long, and it's just massive. And it basically like is a chronological discussion of every war and every major battle that's ever happened. Wow. I used to read that book. I still have it on my shelf. I used to read that book like cover to cover. It was always there if I wanted to know something. And again, don't get me wrong. Like, there are books that are more in depth. Obviously, this book nowadays, like, I don't know how helpful it would be, but it's a cool reminder of like where I come from. And it's a cool reminder that, as cliche as it is, I'm rather sure that everybody has something in their life they could point to that they're good at, and it's something that they've really had to work towards. And to me, like, that book is really like a stepping stone for me in my whole life, really, if you really think about it, between wargaming and teaching and all the stuff that I do now. So.
No, excellent answer. I like that one. Because we've had people say The Campaigns of Napoleon by Chandler in the past.
Oh, I got that one too. That's a good one.
So people have said, so I could actually bloody finish it.
Oh, it's tough. That's a slog. That's a
I,
real
I
slog to get through.
it's one of those books where, and I don't know if you have them, where I go into them if I'm, if I'm refighting Dresden or Lutzen or something like that. I'll go in and I'll read that section just to gem myself up and remind myself of the campaign, and then I'll go back into it when I do another Friedland or
I
whatever.
totally am like that. And also, that's the most, by the way, you picked like the two battles that are the most Yorkshire gamer battles that you could have chosen. Those
Yeah,
two fucking monstrosities of battles, you know? So
got to go for the big ones.
it's a
Got to go for
fun
the big ones.
campaign, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
it
not
certainly
for
is.
them, but like certainly for
No,
us
yeah.
as gamers.
Yeah, exactly. And then finally, on this section is the war games unit. It can be one of your own. It could be one that you covet from somebody else, but something that you'd like to take just to admire.
Yeah, so it would definitely be a unit of 20 British line, actually, from
Mm.
Rorke's Drift, right? So,
Oh,
and
right,
again,
yeah.
it's mostly for sentimental value because
Mm.
probably one of the coolest big game projects that I ever did was I ran an independent study for, I think it was like 4 kids. And this was in, it's hard to remember. It probably was the 2018-2019 school year because it was the year before COVID hit. And they wanted to pick a wargaming topic. They wanted to pick something to study. They picked the Zulu Wars. And for the whole
Oh,
year, we would meet, we would talk about the battles, and we basically built armies for Isan Lawana and Rorke's Drift, and we actually gamed
mm.
those. So
Oh,
again,
cool.
like if it's probably, Isan Lawana was probably the most Yorkshire thing that I could say that I did
Yeah,
because it was huge. I mean,
yeah.
probably 1,000 Zulus, 25s, massive, really cool game. I got the idea from a black powder supplement, and I kind of took that and made it into my own to run Isan Lawana. So it would really be one of those, again, more as like a reminder than anything else to like how much fun gaming can be. As much as I bitch and complain as I have on this episode, wargaming is pretty goddamn fun. So,
Well,
yeah,
that's an excellent message.
yeah.
Can't argue with that. So we'll finally get to the final set part of the show, and Jared can tell us all about his podcast. Okay, we're on to the final part of the podcast now, and this is when I talk to my guest about the big topic, about one thing in particular. And of course, my guest is a podcast host himself, and this does remind me of there's a chap. Sadly, he's passed away now. He used to have a Twitter account called Derek's Wee Toys, a lovely guy, and he came up to me at one of the Lard Day conventions, and he said, "Hey Ken, I love your podcast, but I fucking hate it when you talk to other podcasters."
Really? That is a vicious statement. But I mean, it is a little incestuous and odd, I guess, right?
Yeah, I mean, he was lovely about it. He was a really funny guy. Bless him, he's passed away now. But yeah,
That
so
sucks.
it just reminds me of that when 'cause you're the first fellow podcaster I've had on since that moment that I've
Yeah.
been able to bring that up. So I kind of then the obvious thing then first question is kind of taking you back to those first steps and what
Sure.
made you do a wargaming podcast, and it definitely wasn't money.
No, definitely not. Yeah, no, definitely not. So, it's funny, like I say this sometimes. It's almost like trying to explain like when you met your best friend, which could be probably hard, right? Like
Yeah.
it's hard for me because I always wanted to do a podcast. It was always something I wanted to do. Like I've always wanted to some extent give back to the gaming community. And by the way, just to be really clear, most people when they say that they don't really mean that, right? They just say it because it sounds
Yeah.
pretty, and really what they're trying to do is make a name for themselves. I'm trying to be as genuine as I can. I think about I'm not a God believer. Like, I feel like we get one go with this, right? And what I've always really believed is like giving back. And what I hope is that as long as my podcast goes,
Mm.
I'm hoping that somebody, kid really is like, man, I really wanted to get into gaming. And my hope is that, if they tune into 20-sided gamified, literally the first episode all the way through, they'll get the most holistic 360 look at what gaming is. That was really, I think, the genesis of why I wanted to do this. And I can remember I wasn't playing as much music, like things in my life were winding down a little bit, and I kind of needed something new. And also, and I've alluded to this a couple of times, I've always been kind of the young guy a lot of times in all of the groups that I've been in. And I just wanted to do something for myself, like where I don't have to collaborate with anybody. I could do what I want, when I want to do it, interview who I want, like just do literally everything my way, completely selfishly. And it was basically the summer of, I think it was 2022 when I really started thinking about doing it. And oddly enough, like my first guest was Rick Priestley of all people. Like,
Yeah.
and I guess I say that because I didn't really have to build up. Like, I really was getting really interesting people pretty fast. Probably because of my like resume. Cause I, again, like, on some level, I'm somewhat of an enigma, like,
Mm.
when it comes to wargaming to some extent, I guess. But when it comes to education and teaching and things along those lines, I'm much more like well known. So it's pretty easy to be like, hey, I want to talk about games and education, and somebody sees who I am, and it's like, oh, like I'll give that a shot. So I recorded my first episode in December of 2022, and it got uploaded on March 1st, 2023. And we've been going pretty strong, since that time. Uh, and again, like with all due respect to like podcasters and YouTubers and people like that, there's a lot of shit out there. There really is. Like there aren't that many people. And I'll be honest, like there are even people that I really like that just they don't do a very good job at this. And um I felt like I could do better, and I felt like I could put together a product given my teaching, and like I know how to talk to people, I know how to have a conversation. I hope that I can make conversations interesting in the same way. And again, this is a compliment to you because like I know we've been tongue in cheek a lot, but you're very good at this, right? And
Oh,
you've
thank you.
also, yeah, no, seriously, and you've also done a really good job. Your numbers are amazing, like the amount of people that listen to your show, right? So I felt like I wanted to do that. Like I wanted to be a person that most specifically, it's because my podcast is not just about wargaming. It's about wargaming, board gaming, role playing, simulations, and the connecting component is education. How do we all use these games in some kind of educational way, like in our own settings? And that's what connects all of the different guests to one another. So if you look at our episodes, we've done probably upwards of 90 regular episodes where it's usually a guest that I don't really know that well.
Yeah.
Then there's probably about 15 or 20 friend casts where it's really just me and actual friends, like people like where we're talking about gaming cons or a game we like or this or that. And then there's also some episodes where it's literally my game club, like the board gamers that I game with, like probably the people I'm most close to. And again, what brings it all together is like you've got rules writers, publishers, people who own companies, hobbyists, and what it always comes back to is how much fun games are, how they bring us together, and how they can be used in a really positive way beyond just sitting down and pushing some lead around. So that was really the impetus behind it. And like I'm very proud to say that, you know, if we're talking, I'm definitely not the best wargaming podcast. Like there are definitely people who do that better, but I'll take the Pepsi challenge, so to speak. I really do think that like I don't think there's a more comprehensive podcast out there about games than mine. And I'll take the Pepsi challenge on that. Like you find me a podcast that has had the kind of guests that I've had and the kinds of conversations we've had, I'll take the test against anybody. I do think that we're really one of the best in the business, so to speak. And it's not about money, it's about who we've had on.
Yeah, and I'm going to kind of cover the variation of guests in a little bit further on. But just going back to the kind of the origin story, did you listen to did you consume podcasts yourself beforehand? And not necessarily, it doesn't have to be wargaming, but were the shows that you listened to, I listened to a UFO podcast. That UFO podcast, I enjoy that. Um, the rest is history.
Yeah,
There are related to my work. There's some crime podcasts that I listen to. So were you already consuming podcasts and had an idea about what you were going to do?
absolutely. I think that is definitely true, right? And I won't necessarily mention the names because I get the world that we live in. It's like I say, "Oh, I like that show," then people are going to make assumptions about me. So when it comes to the see, I've been very opinionated so far, but I'll be a little bit more tight here, just because I'm pretty objective on my show. Like, it's really just about putting the information out there. So again, but backing up, yes, like there were plenty of podcasts that I listened to. And again, like, with some of those other more war game related podcasts or related content that's out there, I did, say to myself, I found myself saying a lot like, oh man, like, why is their audio terrible? Like,
Mm.
why is there so much stammering? Like, and I said to myself, instead of you being so critical, like you're so critical of people
Yeah,
like in the war games table, right?
yeah,
I said to myself, well, you know what? Like, if you think that you can do a better job, then maybe you should do that. And that's what I said to myself in my head. And, you know, that's kind of what got it started. And and also I do think, even though I don't make very much money from the show, I do think it connects a lot to my professional world, like my teaching and things that I do. So the podcast is a natural way to talk about a lot of those things. And selfishly, I've learned so much. Like, it's
mm,
helped me as a game designer, it's helped me as a teacher, because in a lot of cases, I don't pretend to be the smartest person in the world. I'm not. Like, I think that I'm a smart guy, but some of the people I've had on know a hell of a lot more about the stuff than I do. And I've learned a ton from the people I've spoken to.
yeah. And did you kind of in your mind have a mission statement, an overall goal with the podcast? We've mentioned it a few times, this link to education. Was that kind of the arrow pointing forward, and you add to that as you went along?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what I said to myself is, I want to bring on as many people that are associated with the world of gaming as I can. And the linchpin, the thesis, the argument that brings everything together is relating back what these people do to education, and really
Hmm.
kind of talking about like game-based learning and game-based pedagogy. So even if you're talking to like a publisher of war games rules, let's say, that has nothing to do with education, I find that what my job is to take what they're talking about and relate it back to maybe this other kind of realm that they may not have thought about. And also, and again, take this for what it is. Like, I'm a very competitive person. I want to be the best. And that has, for my whole life, it has been a fuel for me. Like, I want to have the best show, whatever best means. And again, that's not to say that there aren't other really good people out there, because I do think that there are shows that are, especially shows that have more of a central focus, that are way better than my show. But and I'll rattle some of those names off in a little bit, but like holistically, as a catch-all, I don't know, there's just not that many podcasts out there that do what we do the same way. So
Yeah, no, I think one of the things that I enjoy about your shows is this different, not different formats necessarily, but the different types of guests that you have on that you might not necessarily hear on a regular, in inverted commas, wargaming podcast. And there's that ability and that want and that drive to get people on who maybe that you've not heard of but have something to bring to the show. Um,
absolutely.
so when you're searching for your guests, is that kind of something that you're looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, it's just a very selfish show. Like, it really is. Like,
Oh
whatever
God, yeah.
I'm interested in the moment are really a lot of times the people that I'll look for. So just as like a simple example, obviously when the war in the Ukraine started, a number of years ago, I did a lot of reading about the conflict, and what I was looking for was like, well, has anybody gamed this out? Like, has anybody thought
Yeah.
about this on a political level? And sure as shit, like, I came across the Rand, corporation. I think you would call it a corporation, where they're basically a Washington D.C. think tank, and I found a really great article about wargaming written by one of their analysts, a guy named John Gentile, and it turns out he was a New Yorker as well. So that's an example of like how I would go and find somebody. Sometimes there are people that I've heard of that I admire, or games that I really like that I want to talk to somebody about. Sometimes they're teachers who I kind of find on the internet that I know are using games in the classroom. Other times they're hosts of shows, somebody like you, right? Or like the Little Wars TV guys, people that I admire, because ultimately I believe if we're, as much as I'm talking about being the quote unquote best, I feel like we're all better if we all will kind of work together, in a lot of
Yeah,
ways.
sure.
It's not like, we're making millions of dollars. It's not like we're all competing with each other, but ultimately,
Mm.
even if we were, competition is a really good thing. And I like to talk to people that are doing the same thing that I do. So,
And I think within the small sphere that we both circulate in, we most people do something slightly different or have a slant within their show that makes it, we're not all interviewing the same person with the same Kickstarter every week, which I find, in some genres of podcasts, somebody will release a documentary for example, and they appear on 20 podcasts in a week, and you don't
yeah.
learn anything. You
Yeah.
don't learn, yeah.
Yeah, and like I somewhat, without mentioning names of people or anything like that. I mean, I sort of went down that rabbit hole once, like where, I started thinking about, you know, making the show kind of a platform, maybe sometimes for big companies that like want to talk about their
Mm.
products and things like that. And I did not like it. I
Yeah.
really didn't enjoy it. And also, to be truthful, they weren't particularly receptive either, because I think in a lot of cases, like big companies, they're not that big. We think that they are,
Mm.
but sometimes they're really small operations. So what I really try to do is I really just try to bring on people that I like to talk to, or I want to talk to, you know because there's a lot of other like content out there. Like, nothing bothers me more than the phrase content creator. I despise that term so much, because most of the time, I think it is just the lamest thing. Like when people, you know, will unbox things, and like, I'm just so glad that I don't do that. And like, the day that I start doing that is the day that I don't want to do this anymore. Because it's a lot of effort, right? I mean, it's just an enormous amount of time. And frankly, I outsource a lot of the editing and stuff like that. I don't do it on my own because I don't have time.
No, that's it. That's interesting, Terry. You've got a very similar philosophy with me to me, and I think what I find is, as a consumer of other podcasts, is that when kind of somebody sets off and they go big name, big name, big name, big company, and then after 10 episodes, it's like, what the fuck am I going to do now?
Oh,
And
totally. Yeah.
without that overarching, God, I hate using mission statement. It sounds like I'm fucking manager. Yeah, but you know what I mean. Without that
I
overall
do.
arching goal behind what you're
But
doing.
look, here's the scary part though, Ken,
Mm.
because again, like, I don't know what your experience has been like in terms of like viewership. I have found I could have Jesus Christ on the show. Jesus Christ could come up out of the grave.
He's on
Uh
next week,
yeah,
actually.
I know, right? Like, yeah, absolutely. Like, make that announcement. My numbers will be exactly the same. They really would be. Like I find that it doesn't matter necessarily who I interview. It almost matters more as to like what their social media presence is. I'll give you an
Mm.
example. Who the fuck is bigger, like bigger deal to like the genre of gaming than Richard Garfield and Scaff Elias, who invented Magic the Gathering? I interviewed them. Those numbers were the same as anybody else's. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that you would think that the world would work differently, that like getting those really famous people, at least with what we do, you
Yeah.
know, like getting quote unquote famous people on, I find it's irrelevant. It doesn't really matter. So really what you should focus on is building the brand and just getting the people on that you want to talk to, right? And
Oh God, yeah.
conversely, if there was, here, I'll give you an example. Henry Cavill. He's like the white whale, right? Because
Yeah,
if you
yeah.
get him on your show, that's a different story, right? Because he has a massive social media presence. He could come on and literally be the worst interview in the history of interviews,
Yeah. And
and you
everyone would
could
be
be
on it. Yeah.
destroyed, and that will blow up your podcast. So it's like
Mm.
the world we live in is insane.
I always find, and it always makes me laugh, is that the shows that I enjoy the most are usually ones with the worst viewing figures.
Right.
So I did one with a lovely guy, Nick Schofield. He's a Catholic priest down south of England, and he did a book on the Papal Zouaves and the St Patrick's Battalion,
Right.
who fought in the Italian Risorgimento, and I had the best time talking to him because he was so enthusiastic. He was really into his subject. He knew his onions, and it was just like amazing. And
Yeah.
like nothing.
Yeah, that's what it's
Uh,
about, right? Because I mean, look, unless you're making money like hand over foot,
yeah,
like, but even if you were, like, you talk to somebody you don't want to talk to, it's going to suck. And no matter how much money you're making, right, it probably is not going to matter. So ultimately, what it comes down to is we should all, as podcast hosts, we should be doing what we want to do.
exactly. And I
So,
think that's definitely the way forward. I've got to ask you about the name. 20
sure.
sided gamified podcast.
Yeah,
Where did
where did it
that
come
come?
from?
And gamified, I have to say, is it's not a. I don't know. Is it in the Oxford Dictionary? I don't
I
know.
don't know. That's a good question. I will say I'm terrible at naming things and always have
Yeah,
been.
yeah.
I'm more of like I'll do the thing, but naming it is usually not something I'm particularly good at. But that being said, so I feel like, and this might cause an argument, but I feel like nothing is more synonymous with games than the 20-sided die, right? Like you think of
Yeah,
it, I mean, for us as historical war gamers, it's probably the D6, but like just generally speaking, you could show a D20 to anybody on the street and they're probably going to know it's associated with D&D, arguably like one of the most, next to Catan, like one of the most recognizable games that there is, right? So to me, like that die represents gaming. And then the
mm,
idea of gamified or gamification is what I do. Like, where if I'm teaching something, how do you take whatever it is that you're teaching and turn it into a game so that somebody can learn it better? So that's basically where the name came from. And not only is it the name of the show, but it's the name of the kind of like company that I run outside of my teaching.
there's not just yourself that appears on the show. There are others. And
Yes.
when I was on your show, Kelly, is it McManus? His last name?
McManus. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Was on the show, so he's not here to defend himself. So
No, he's not.
if you just want to slag Kelly off for 10 minutes, you
Just make
can.
fun of Kelly. It's actually fucking Kelly is usually the one making fun of me. And let me tell everybody
Is
something
it?
about I love Kelly McManus.
Yeah,
He is a deceptively good gamer. Like
is he?
he is. Like he has kicked my ass recently multiple times. He kicked my ass in the board game Shogun. I can't talk a ton about it, but like we're developing a game, or I'm developing a game with a couple of friends of mine, and Kelly played it the other day and just fucked me over at every opportunity. I love the dude. He's who I would call really the co-host of the show, which I
Yeah.
think every show could benefit from having a co-host because I don't know, for a whole bunch of different reasons. Like it gives you a chance to think a little bit more, you get a different perspective. But yeah, you've got Kelly who kind of helps me with the show. And I had met him through a work thing where he had hired me to come in and run some games at his museum. And he's been with me really ever since. He tries to make as many shows as he can. And there's some other people as well. The infamous Mike character in quotations. He's been on the show a whole bunch. My friend Brian, who is like one of my oldest gaming friends, who's like right around my age. Corey Ring from Cigar Box Battles and my friend Titch White. Both of them, I would say they're pretty regularly on the show. So yeah, like there is kind of that cast of characters because ultimately the way I see a podcast, especially with them on it, is you want to feel like you're at the table. Like you want to feel like you're in the room with them. And what better way to do that than like interview people that are your friends. I even hate that word interview. It's more like have a conversation with friends, you know?
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we shoot for.
Yeah, I think the it's similar here with the Brews in the Vineyard shows that I do with Alex and Ian and Sean. It's just a chance to maybe let your hair down a little bit as well, and you're kind of not having to do as much preparation. You saw the show notes that I sent you for for the Brews in the Vineyard. I just send them an email that says let's talk bollocks for 3 hours, and it kind of
Yeah, no,
works.
totally. But I'll be honest, like I don't really people think I do a lot more prep than I do. I
Mm,
really don't. I mean, don't get me wrong, like I've been running enough Dungeons and Dragons games in my lifetime to be able to do things on the fly, and I usually have a pretty good sense of who somebody is, but I kind of like not knowing very much, about that person. Like I want to be surprised. And I don't really watch professional wrestling anymore. I did when I was like a really little kid, but like there's a famous broadcaster who would like do color commentary and commentary, for matches and things. And he would say the same thing, like pro wrestling is basically scripted, but he would never want to know the finish, like because
yeah.
he wants to be able to tell like a very genuine story. So yeah, I don't do a ton of prep work.
And occasionally, I've noticed you let Kelly go off on his own and interview people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if I can't do it, or if Kelly has somebody that he really wants to talk to, like he's friends with, or he's the connection, yeah, there are times where Kelly will do it. Yep, absolutely. That being said, and I even talked to him about this because recently I just got so busy at work that it was really hard for me to record. And we had even talked about like the idea of him taking over hosting duties for a period of time, which fundamentally I I don't have a problem with that per se, right? Like because obviously I trust him, and theoretically you would imagine if you set everything up the right way, anybody could really host it. But then I kind of said to myself, but I kind of am 20-sided gamified. So like if I'm not there, then it would just be so weird. So there will be times where we have guest hosts and things like that, and Kelly will do things. But the bottom line is, like, the day that I can't do it anymore is really the day that I shut the show down.
Mm, yeah, because I was going to talk to you about output as well. Because when you set off, there's a saying that we have here in the UK that you've set off like a stabbed rat, and
That's a funny term.
and I was saying earlier on, I think I'm on episode 70. You're like 95 plus the friendship casts and stuff. Um, did was that a plan, or did you just get into it so much that you just got on a roll?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of free time over the summer. So I think what had happened was initially, I think I had planned on doing like an episode a month or an episode every 3 weeks or something along those lines. I don't know. It just, I like it. And it kind of got out of control where there were times where I was interviewing multiple people a week and sometimes posting multiple episodes like on in a given day. So now I think we're at the place, especially now that we're established, we don't have to necessarily worry about being thirsty for listens or anything like that. I think posting every couple of weeks is probably the direction that we're going to go. Even if I record a whole lot of episodes over the summer when I have time, it'll probably be like a posting cycle of like every 2 or 3 weeks, just because you don't want the product to get watered down, and also, I have a full-time job. I'm also probably going to be doing grad school again in the fall to get a degree in military history, which is
Oh
going to
wow.
which is going to open some doors for me in a bunch of different ways. So it's going to be tough to manage that schedule. So I think basically posting every few weeks, I think, is going to be the way that we go forward.
Yeah, because you posted something recently. I saw just kind of saying that you were going to slow down the
Yeah,
gears on the
yeah,
show.
I wanted to be like upfront with people because I do think there are a lot of really dedicated listeners, so I didn't want to just stop posting and then have people wonder like what happened. So that's why I had on Instagram, I had kind of tagged a video of me just explaining what that schedule is going to look like moving forward. And
Mm.
I unpinned it eventually just because I think now, we're back to like more of a normal cycle.
I think you kind of mentioned earlier on the kind of next thing I was going to explore that you don't quite do as much as me, and that's kind of on preparation editing and all that side of things. Is that kind of taken away from you?
Yeah, sort of. I mean, I'm just lazy, to be honest. Like, I don't have time to learn
Yeah,
video editing skills. I mean, that's kind of sort of part of why I don't put stuff on YouTube. Like, I just don't have time in my day to learn a whole nother set of skills, like in terms of like editing videos and editing stuff. I have an engineer who will edit what I do for sound quality, you know.
right.
So we make sure that everything sounds really good. You know, he's the same guy that produces my music. So but that's it. I almost never do anything when it comes to editing actual episodes. So like the idea of like cutting out a line or editing something because, you know, maybe the conversation went too long. I don't do any of that stuff, and that's deliberate.
When you were looking at doing the show, then did you made the choice for audio rather than visual for the reasons that we talked about? What were your thoughts on the free to air Patreon side of things? How did you work around that?
Meaning like when I set the Patreon account up for
Yeah,
myself,
yeah,
you mean?
yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, well, I hope I'm answering the question correctly. I mean, so basically what I do for the Patreon is essentially I record certain episodes that only go to people that are on Patreon. So like people you know, sign up, they pay $1 a month or something along those lines, or $2 a month. And I usually will try to post at least one very specific episode just for them. So in
Okay.
theory, like if the podcast really took off and people wanted to support the show, they would get some extra content. I'm not great with it. Like, you know, sometimes yeah, like I forget to post something, which is why I put the, if I'm just being blunt, like you know, that's why I put the fee so low.
Mm.
So in fact, like today I'm probably gonna record a Patreon thing, right? And yeah, back to your earlier question as well, like, you know, for the YouTube thing, it is somewhat laziness on my part. I mean, I could certainly like set this up more for like a video thing, but then
Mm.
you have to be in front of your computer watching two people talk. Like I don't know how interesting that is. So really I was just trying to keep this all pretty simple. Which is why I just wanted to go the audio route.
You know, obviously, I know who your most memorable guest was. So,
Oh,
uh,
clearly.
I'll need to ask who your second most memorable guest was.
Sure. So I mean, there have been a lot. Like it's kind of hard
Yeah.
to narrow down, you know. But I mean, just again, I had taken a couple notes about this morning. You know, like some of the people that I've really enjoyed talking to. Definitely Mark Backhouse from Strength and Honor. He's been on the show a couple of times. He's also a teacher, like really great to talk to.
Lovely lad.
Um,
Lovely lad.
Absolutely. Yep. Mark Vistoso from Mark's Wargaming Room, and Greg and Tony and Miles from Little Wars. Like they're all, you know, they all kind of do this as well, so that it makes the conversations a little bit easier. Um, Corey Ring is always great to have on from Cigar Box Battle. So he makes all the gaming mats that get used at a lot of conventions. He's always really cool to talk to. And one of my best friends and gaming friends also is buddies with him. So like that's how I kind of got to know him over the years. Uwe Eichart from Academy Games. So Academy Games, they make kind of like hybrid board game / war games, uh,
Yes. Yeah.
which they're great. He was
Mm.
awesome, and he was awesome to talk to. I had him on recently. Tom Mowat, who worked for the British government. He was at Salute last year, does a lot with professional wargaming. He was an amazing conversationalist. And then again, like I just have had so many people on. Rick Priestley, I talked to Alessio Cavatore the other day, and he's actually coming on the show next week. I mean, honestly, everybody that I've talked to has been special in their own way, but those names that I sort of mentioned were definitely, you know, some of those great people.
The Major Moet one was certainly one that
Oh,
was
that
on
was a
my
really good one.
yeah, really
Richard
good.
Garfield was probably the most intimidating person I've ever spoken to, the guy who made Magic, because he's so goddamn smart.
Yeah.
He like thinks differently than everybody, so that was a great episode, but I was really nervous for that one. I'm almost never nervous for most things, but that one I was really nervous for, mostly because I have, I don't know, like I've been playing Magic, I played it as a kid,
Yeah.
so
No, a great person to have on the show. For most of my audience are historical figure war gamers. So from your shows that you've done, who would be, if it was somebody wanted to dip in and speak to somebody and listen to an episode with somebody from maybe board gaming, what would be an episode or a guest that you would kind of recommend?
So somebody from the board gaming world, like if you wanted
Mm,
a, sure. So I would say the Tori Brown and Kevin Bertram, our Bertrand episode, they
mm,
basically are associated with Fort Circle games. Um, I would definitely recommend that one. Again, I would recommend that Uwe Eichert episode that I did. That one was actually, I think, the very last one I posted, or the second to last one. A one that I really liked was the Jason Matthews episode, and he wrote the board game Twilight Struggle, which is
okay.
really like one of the best teaching games about the Cold War that you can get. Jamie Stegmeyer from Stonemeyer Games. That's Wingspan, Scythe, those games. Like if you go to a board gaming store, I guarantee you'll find those. Those are all board game centric episodes.
Mm.
I
No,
will
yeah.
say though, my viewership, it's all over the place, but I would say, even though I don't consider the podcast strictly historical wargaming, I get a lot of people from the historical wargaming world that listen to the show. Because again, like I've interviewed or I've had guests, for tons of people from that world on the
Mm.
show.
Yeah, no, it's nice to get recommendations for the people who listen to this show who, are people who are maybe not going to come onto this show board game wise. It's not something that I
Yeah,
particularly cover. So to have a list of those that they can dip into yours is absolutely
definitely.
fantastic. You've even had a Scrabble person on, if I remember correctly.
Oh yeah, I have Will Anderson. Yeah. So
Yeah.
Will is the infamous character, this like, Sith like friend of mine, my buddy Mike. He went to school with Will. Will might be like one of the smartest people I've ever met. Like just trying to understand how his brain works.
Yeah.
Um, I will never forget. I was actually at Historicon, and I had sat down with Will, and we were just kind of shooting the shit. And I was asking him how you practice for Scrabble, and he was showing me, and like, he has this app, and there are these like 20 jumbled words, and he just goes down the line telling me what words are in there, and I'm like, oh my god, dude, that's amazing, like, you must have seen these combinations before. And he's like, no, I've never seen these combinations in my life.
Wow.
And I was like, Jesus Christ. Like, that is, you want to talk about a superpower, that is a
Yeah.
superpower. And I think what's really cool about him is like, he's probably the most normal Scrabble player you'll ever find. Because again, like, with all due respect to Scrabble players, like, and a lot of those folks, like, their brains just work differently than than other folks, right? Like, they're the definition of neurodivergent. But Will, you would never know. Like, if you just met Will on the street and had a conversation with him, you would never know that he's like probably the world's best Scrabble player, and definitely the best at explaining the game to people. That actually, I think, is more impressive about him than his just ability to play the game.
Yeah, no, fantastic, a fantastically different episode, and a
Yeah,
really,
that was a
really
good one.
interesting, really interesting. I know you're short on time now, even though we've been going for 4 hours.
Yeah,
So
I'm exhausted, Ken. I'm not going to
I
lie to you.
have I won, have I won?
Yeah,
So
indeed.
I just kind of want to ask you then, just before we wrap up, on what your future plans for the podcast are. You just posted something today about speaking to some guys got a game coming out called Fight for America, which looks quite
Oh,
interesting.
that's a wild. That's like probably the heaviest episode we've ever done. So I won't say too much. It'll probably be out by the time this comes out. But
Yeah.
yeah, like that was where I met with Alessio, and then kind of, it's like, it's hard to explain. You kind of have to listen to the
Mm.
episode, but it's kind of like a moving art installation. It's actually going to be in the UK, where
Oh
people
wow.
sit down and play. It's going to be in London. Where people sit down and play a game about January 6th. so super intense, like really intense. They'll be able to explain it on the show better than I will. Or maybe I can explain it and I just don't want to because it's a heavy topic, dude. It's
Yeah,
controversial and heavy.
I can imagine.
But yeah, like I think for the show, I'm just gonna keep doing what I'm doing. I'll stop when I don't like it anymore. I have plans to travel. I'd like to go to different conventions and go to different places where we can get more eyes and ears on the show. And just kind of keep building our audience. There's also some other stuff that I can't really get a ton into, but I'll just say that it involves game design. So,
Oh, cool.
which again is not so much connected to the podcast, but it's definitely connected to the business, meaning 20 Sided Gamified LLC. I'll be able to talk more about that depending on whether I get hired. Maybe I'll just I'll leave that there.
Yeah,
And
no
yeah,
worries.
and like I said, I really enjoy everything that I do, and I enjoy coming on shows like this, and I like talking to people about games. So I'm gonna keep doing it until I get bored of it, or keep doing it until I just can't do it anymore.
Awesome. That's what we like to hear. It's always great to have other shows out and about who are enthusiastic about the hobby. And lots of congratulations to you for tracking on and getting the job done. And
That's kind. Thanks, man.
very listenable show, especially episode 66, which is
Oh, absolutely. My favorite
so.
word for today's episode.
Yeah, and just to finish off, then, mate, how can people get to listen to the show? Where are you hosted? That's the kind
Sure.
of thing.
So we're pretty much on all platforms. Honestly, I think the best way to do it would be if you Google 20 Sided Gamified Podcast, we get a ton of hits. Like you can pretty much go and listen to the show on any platform you like. Obviously, like for us, it would be even better to come to our Instagram page. Like, so again, like, going on Instagram, that's the main platform that we use to get news out. So hopping on Instagram and looking up 20 Sided Gamified podcast, giving us like a follow would be awesome. And then, subscribing to the show. Because by subscribing, you're going to get all the news about the show, and you'll have access to pretty much all of the episodes, and you can really do it from pretty much. I don't think there's any platforms we're not on. I do everything through Acast, and I think you do Podbean. I think, right?
Yes, I do. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
they distribute it really well,
and that's what Acast does as well. So so that would probably be the best way. We also have a website, which again, like it's 20 Sided Gamified LLC.com, but you have to put dashes between the 20 and the sided and so on and so forth. But that, that's really just used for when we get hired for consultations and things like that. I would say going on Instagram or even just Googling the name of the show is easiest. And then you could also go to YouTube and just Google my name, and anything that I've ever appeared on is pretty like well curated on YouTube.
No, well, that's absolutely fantastic. Well, hopefully we'll get a bit of a crossover of audience, and
Absolutely, that'd be great.
yeah, and we might have upset a few people, lost a few along the way, but
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure, but whatever.
You can't make an omelette without breaking eggs.
This is very true. You can't make everybody happy, so.
Well, that just leaves me to say goodnight to the audience. If you'd like to say goodnight, Jared.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I hope you weren't bored to tears by this 4-hour extravaganza. I enjoyed it, so I hope that you do as well. And then again, like all kidding aside, like I really do hope you enjoyed it. And Ken, you have an amazing show. Like in a lot of ways, like you're an inspiration to me, along with some of those other folks that I mentioned earlier. I think that what we're all collectively doing, you, the Little Wars TV guys, Mark Festoso, I feel like what we're all kind of doing is kind of the same thing. We just want more people to know about what we do and why this hobby is so wonderful, So I really do hope your audience enjoyed it. And yeah, I mean, if more people come by to check out 20 Sided Gamified, even better, So yeah, thanks so much to everybody for listening.
Oh, that'd be awesome. Right. Good night, everyone.
Night. See ya.
Oh, I hope you enjoyed that extended edition of the show there with Jared. And if you haven't already, please pop over and have a listen to the 20-sided gamified show. And as we discussed in the episode, a few different things on there that are not going to get covered on this show, like board games and what have you. And some of the educational aspects of some of the stuff that Jared covers is really different and really incisive as well. So if you've not already, pop along and have a listen to that show. I'd like to tell you who my next guest was, but I haven't got a bloody clue because, a bit like last year, I'm juggling 4 or 5 people to try and get them to commit to a time, etc., and it's just not going very well at the moment. So I will be back in a couple of weeks with somebody, even if it's my dog. We will get somebody on. In the meantime, I will be at Salute in London next weekend. I think it's the 13th. And I shall be taking the Battle of Mentana game. It's its last public opening, I would think. Maybe there's a potential of it going to a couple of other shows, but not this year. And I'll be there with Andy Dickinson, my good wargaming chum from Leeds Wargames Club. And we're getting some help down in that there London from the Continental War Society Club, who are going to uh, put some people on the game to play as it's in their sort of zone of interest. And I'd really like to thank Roy Boardman, who has sorted all that out for us, which is brilliant. I love taking stuff around the country to shows, but it's so difficult to get a full posse of people to, 5, 6 people to put a reasonably big game on at a show. To say Claymore or Colours or Warfare or Beachhead or something mad like that. I do need help from people in the local area to join in and play the game. So thank you very much to the people who've done that in the past, Simon Robb last year at Jutland and James Cutts as well. And to the people who are going to help this year, it's much appreciated. So come over and say hello if you've not done so already. And if you have, if I know you, I'm sure you'll bob over for a chat. Lovely, friendly show. I had a great time the last couple of years that I've been, and looking forward to this year very much. So, until later, see thee.